between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, buried beneath the windswept plains of southern Iraq, lies evidence of a civilization that challenges everything conventional archaeology tells us about the linear progression of human development. The ancient city of Lagash, dating to approximately 4800 BC, emerged as one of the most powerful and sophisticated urban centres of early Mesopotamia, only to disappear so completely from the historical record that its very existence was questioned by scholars for over 2 millennia. What makes this vanishing particularly perplexing is not simply that the city was abandoned. Settlements across ancient Mesopotamia experienced cycles of growth and decline, but that Lagash was systematically erased from cultural memory with a thoroughness that suggests deliberate action rather than natural decline. The archaeological record reveals that at its height during the early dynastic period, Lagash controlled territory exceeding 2,000 square kilometres and housed an estimated population of 150,000 inhabitants across its urban core and surrounding agricultural settlements. The city's administrative archives, preserved in tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets, document a level of bureaucratic sophistication and technological achievement that supposedly did not exist in human civilization for another millennium. Yet sometime around 2100 BC, this thriving metropolis ceased to exist not just physically, but also in the cultural memory of subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations. Later Babylonian and Assyrian texts, which meticulously recorded the histories and achievements of other Sumerian city-states like Uruk, Ur and Eridu, contain virtually no references to Lagash, despite its obvious importance in earlier periods. This systematic absence from later historical narratives suggests something more profound than simple abandonment occurred at Lagash, an event so catastrophic or controversial that it was deliberately expunged from Mesopotamian collective memory. The existence of ancient Lagash remained unknown to modern scholarship until 1877, when French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzec began systematic excavations at the site, known locally as Stele in southern Iraq. What de Sarzec uncovered over the following 25 years fundamentally challenged contemporary understanding of Sumerian civilization, and revealed a city whose architectural sophistication and administrative complexity exceeded anything previously documented from the 3rd millennium BC. The excavations revealed a massive urban complex spanning over 600 hectares, with monumental architecture, sophisticated water management systems, and vast administrative archives that documented every aspect of urban life with bureaucratic precision that would not be matched until the Roman Empire. De Sarzec arrived at Stele, following local reports of ancient brickwork and inscribed stones appearing in the seasonal flood deposits that periodically exposed archaeological remains across southern Mesopotamia. His initial test excavations immediately revealed sculptural fragments and architectural elements that demonstrated artistic and technical sophistication far exceeding expectations for early Sumerian culture. Within the first excavation season, de Sarzec's team uncovered over 40 statues and relief sculptures showing remarkable craftsmanship, including the famous statue of Gudea, now housed in the Louvre Museum, which displays polished diorite carving techniques that require tools and methods conventionally dated to much later periods. The scale of the ruins became apparent as excavations expanded across the site. French teams working under de Sarzec and his successors mapped a city whose monumental core alone covered approximately 90 hectares, with residential and agricultural zones extending the total urban footprint to over 600 hectares. This massive extent placed Lagash among the largest cities of the ancient world, comparable in size to contemporary urban centres in Egypt, and substantially larger than other known Sumerian cities of the same period. The architectural remains revealed sophisticated urban planning, with distinct quarters for administration, religious activities, craft production, and residential occupation, all connected by paved streets and integrated drainage systems. The discovery of Lagash sent shockwaves through the emerging field of Assyriology and Near Eastern archaeology. Prior to de Sarzec's work, scholarly understanding of Sumerian civilization derived primarily from later Babylonian and Assyrian texts that portrayed the early Sumerian period as relatively primitive compared to subsequent Mesopotamian achievements. The physical evidence from Lagash contradicted this narrative by demonstrating that Sumerian cities of the mid-3rd millennium BC possessed technological capabilities and organizational sophistication that rivaled or exceeded later civilizations. The quality of stonework, the precision of architectural measurements, and the complexity of administrative systems revealed at Lagash forced scholars to fundamentally reassess the developmental trajectory of Mesopotamian civilization. The excavation methodology employed by de Sarzec and the French teams, while limited by 19th century archaeological standards, nonetheless produced detailed documentation of architectural contexts and artifact associations that enabled subsequent researchers to reconstruct the city's organization and function. Photographs from the early excavation seasons show massive brick platforms emerging from the sand, with foundation walls extending several meters below surface level, and construction techniques employing standardized brick sizes and bonding patterns that demonstrate advanced understanding of structural engineering principles. The French teams recorded architectural measurements with severe precision, creating plans that reveal geometric regularities and proportional relationships that suggest the builders worked from comprehensive design specifications rather than improvised construction methods. Particularly significant was the discovery of foundation deposits containing inscribed cylinders and tablets that identified the structures and their builders, providing the first comprehensive historical framework for early dynastic Sumerian civilization. These foundation texts, written in archaic Sumerian script, named rulers previously unknown to scholarship, and described construction projects, military campaigns, and administrative reforms that documented a complex political history spanning several centuries. The inscriptions revealed that Lagash was not simply a religious centre, but a major political and economic power that controlled extensive territory and engaged in sophisticated diplomatic and military competition with neighbouring city-states. The architectural techniques observed in Lagash's monumental buildings exceeded conventional expectations for Bronze Age construction capabilities. Foundation platforms for major temples incorporated drainage systems that prevented water damage through carefully designed channels and porous fill materials that directed moisture away from structural elements. The precision of wall alignments measured by modern surveying equipment during later excavation campaigns revealed angular accuracy within fractions of a degree and dimensional consistency that required sophisticated measurement tools and quality control procedures. Stone threshold blocks weighing several tons showed evidence of precision fitting that created weatherproof seals without mortar, a technique that demands advanced stone cutting capabilities and understanding of thermal expansion properties. The discoveries at Lagash provided the first extensive corpus of early Sumerian administrative documents, economic texts, and legal records that revolutionized understanding of Mesopotamian social and economic organization. These documents, preserved in temple and palace archives, revealed a literate bureaucratic culture that maintained detailed records of every aspect of urban life, from grain rations for individual workers to complex multi-year construction projects involving thousands of labourers. The systematic nature of this record-keeping and the mathematical sophistication demonstrated in accounting procedures indicated that Lagash possessed an educated administrative class with training in specialised technical fields including mathematics, metrology, and archival management. The administrative buildings at Lagash yielded what remains one of the largest collections of cuneiform documents ever discovered from a single site, approximately 90,000 clay tablets that document in extraordinary detail the city's economic, legal, religious and military activities. These tablets, dating primarily to the early dynastic III period around 2400 BC, reveal an administrative system of staggering complexity that tracked individual workers, calculated rations with mathematical precision, recorded land transactions, and maintained detailed inventories of materials that modern corporations would recognize as sophisticated supply chain management. The precision of this record-keeping system becomes apparent in tablets like BM 100 3375, which documents the distribution of grain rations to temple workers with calculations that account for seasonal variations, worker classifications, and dependence with accuracy measured to fractions of a litre. The archive collections from Lagash provide unprecedented insight into the operational details of Sumerian urban economy and demonstrate organizational capabilities that challenge conventional narratives of gradual civilizational development. The tablets document a centralized administrative system that coordinated activities across dozens of temple complexes, agricultural estates, and craft workshops, maintaining real-time inventory tracking and resource allocation that required constant information flow between dispersed facilities. Monthly reports compiled at the central archives summarize production outputs, labor deployments, and material consumption with statistical precision that enabled administrators to identify efficiency problems and adjust resource allocations accordingly. The mathematical sophistication demonstrated in these administrative tablets far exceeded the basic arithmetic typically attributed to Bronze Age bureaucracies. Lagash scribes employed multiplication tables, division procedures, and fractional calculations that handled complex distribution problems involving multiple variables and proportional allocations. Tablets designated as accounting practice texts reveal that scribes underwent extensive training in mathematical procedures, including area calculations for irregular field plots, volume measurements for grain storage facilities, and compound interest calculations for long-term loans. The standardization of these mathematical procedures across the entire archive indicates that Lagash maintained formal educational institutions that produced administrators with specialized technical competencies. The temple archive of Bau, goddess of healing and agriculture, preserved in collections now distributed among museums in Paris, London, and Philadelphia, contains particularly detailed economic records spanning approximately 40 years during the reign of Entermena, around 2400 BC. These records document the operations of an agricultural estate employing over 6,000 workers, organized into specialized work gangs for ploughing, harvesting, irrigation maintenance, and textile production. The tablets track individual workers by name, record their daily rations, calculate their annual grain allotments, and document family relationships that determine dependent support obligations. The comprehensiveness of this personnel management system, which maintained accurate records for thousands of individuals across decades, demonstrates data processing capabilities that required sophisticated filing systems and retrieval procedures. Legal documents from the Lagash archives reveal a complex jurisprudence system with standardized contract formats, property registration procedures, and dispute resolution mechanisms that protected individual rights while maintaining institutional authority. Land sale contracts specified precise field measurements using standardized units, identified boundary markers, listed witness attestations, and included curse formulae that invoked divine punishment for fraudulent transactions. The consistency of these legal formats across hundreds of documents indicates that Lagash maintained a professional scribal class trained in legal procedures and capable of producing enforceable contracts that were recognized across the entire city-state territory. Military administration tablets document the organization, equipment, and deployment of Lagash's armed forces with detail that reveals sophisticated logistical planning and strategic thinking. These texts describe military units organized by equipment type and tactical function, list personnel by name with their assigned weapons and armor, calculate provisions requirements for campaign deployments, and maintain inventories of captured booty that was processed through official channels rather than distributed informally. One particularly detailed tablet series documents a military campaign against the neighbouring city of Yuma, describing force composition, march routes, supply depot locations, and engagement results with precision that enabled strategic planning and post-campaign analysis. The archive evidence indicates that Lagash's bureaucratic sophistication extended beyond mere record-keeping to encompass strategic planning, performance analysis, and predictive modelling that enabled administrators to anticipate problems and implement preventive solutions. Agricultural planning documents calculated expected yields based on historical data, adjusted planting allocations to optimize crop diversity, and established reserve storage levels to buffer against harvest failures. The systematic approach to resource management documented in these texts demonstrates institutional learning processes that accumulated knowledge across generations and enabled continuous improvement of administrative procedures. Archaeological investigation of Lagash's infrastructure revealed a hydraulic engineering achievement that conventional timelines suggest should not have been possible for early dynastic Mesopotamia. The city's water management system, documented in both physical remains and administrative texts, included an extensive network of canals totaling over 300 kilometers in length, sophisticated flow control mechanisms, and underground drainage systems that maintained optimal water levels for both irrigation and urban sanitation. Tablet excavations conducted by the University of Pennsylvania between 1968 and 1973 uncovered canal construction specifications that demonstrate advanced understanding of hydraulic principles, including precise gradient calculations, flow rate optimization, and sediment management techniques that would not be formally recognized by engineering science until the 19th century AD. The primary canal system that supplied Lagash with water diverted flow from the Tigris River through a main channel measuring approximately 15 meters wide and 3 meters deep that maintained consistent gradient across 40 kilometers of distance. Survey data recorded by the University of Pennsylvania expedition revealed that this canal achieved gradient precision of approximately 1 meter of elevation drop per 10 kilometers of distance, a specification that requires sophisticated surveying equipment and mathematical calculation to implement accurately. The canal's alignment avoided natural obstacles while maintaining optimal flow characteristics, demonstrating that the designers possessed comprehensive topographical knowledge and engineering capabilities to implement complex infrastructure projects across vast distances. Branch canals distributed water from the main channel to agricultural fields, residential districts, and industrial facilities through a hierarchical network that maintained pressure balance and prevented waterlogging or drought conditions. The engineering specifications for these distribution channels, preserved in administrative tablets from the reign of Urukagina around 2300 BC, specify channel widths, depths, and gradient requirements with precision measured in finger widths, approximately 2 centimeters, across distances of hundreds of meters. Maintaining such precise specifications during construction required standardized measuring tools, trained surveyors, and quality control inspections that verified compliance with design specifications. The underground drainage system discovered beneath Lagash's urban core demonstrates even more advanced engineering capabilities through its incorporation of principles that modern civil engineering recognizes as essential for urban sanitation. Excavations by the French Archaeological Mission in the 1930s uncovered ceramic pipe networks that collected wastewater from residential buildings and directed it through underground channels to disposal points outside the city. These drainage pipes, manufactured in standardized sections with interlocking joint designs, created continuous conduits that maintained flow through precise gradient control and periodic inspection chambers that enabled maintenance access. The drainage system incorporated settlement tanks at strategic points that removed solid materials before final discharge, preventing channel blockage and reducing environmental contamination. The design of these tanks, revealed through excavation of intact examples, employed baffle systems that slowed water flow to enable particle settling while maintaining sufficient current to prevent stagnant conditions. The hydraulic principles demonstrated in these settlement tank designs require understanding of fluid dynamics and particle behavior that was not formally recognized by Western engineering until the 19th century Industrial Revolution created demand for improved urban sanitation systems. Flow control structures within the canal network enabled operators to adjust water distribution according to seasonal requirements and maintenance needs. Administrative tablets describing canal operations specify procedures for opening and closing control gates, calculating flow rates through various channels, and coordinating water deliveries to ensure equitable distribution among competing users. The sophistication of these operational procedures indicates that Lagash maintained a professional water management bureaucracy with specialized training in hydraulic engineering principles and practical experience in system operations. The scale of the hydraulic infrastructure and the precision of its engineering design required massive labor mobilization and sustained institutional support that could only be provided by a powerful centralized authority with access to substantial economic resources. Administrative texts document construction projects employing thousands of workers organized into specialized gangs for excavation, masonry, and quality control. The tablets record daily work assignments, calculate earth-moving volumes, and track material consumption with precision that enabled project managers to monitor progress and adjust resource allocations to maintain construction schedules. The sacred precinct of Girsu within Lagash contained temple structures whose architectural proportions and astronomical alignments demonstrate knowledge of celestial mechanics that far exceeded the documented capabilities of Sumerian astronomers. The main temple platform dedicated to the god in Girsu measured exactly 144 meters along its eastern face, a dimension that encoded multiple astronomical constants, including the lunar month duration and the solar year length through proportional relationships that required sophisticated mathematical understanding. Excavations by French archaeologist André Parrot between 1948 and 1953 revealed that the temple's internal chambers incorporated acoustic properties that amplified specific frequencies while dampening others, creating sound environments that modern acoustic engineers recognize as requiring advanced understanding of wave propagation and resonance phenomena. The temple platform orientation aligned precisely with the rising position of specific stars at particular times of year, creating astronomical sight lines that enabled accurate tracking of celestial movements and calculation of calendar dates. Modern surveying of the structure conducted by the French Archaeological Mission confirmed that the platform's eastern face deviated less than 1/4 degree from true astronomical east, a precision that requires sophisticated surveying instruments and astronomical knowledge to achieve. The alignment precision becomes even more remarkable when the effects of precession are considered. The gradual shift in Earth's axial orientation that changes the apparent positions of stars over thousands of years. Correcting the Girsu temple alignments for 4,000 years of precessional motion reveals that the structure was oriented towards specific stellar positions that held significance in Sumerian cosmology. The architectural proportions of the Girsu temple encode mathematical relationships that connect lunar and solar cycles through dimensional ratios that require advanced astronomical knowledge to calculate. The platform's length of 144 meters represents exactly 12 times 12, a number that appears throughout Mesopotamian mathematics and astronomy as a fundamental organizational unit. This dimension, when compared with other structural measurements, creates proportional relationships that match the ratio between the lunar month of approximately 29 and 1/2 days and the solar year of approximately 365 and 1/4 days. Encoding these astronomical constants in architectural proportions demonstrates that the temple designers possessed detailed knowledge of celestial mechanics and intentionally incorporated this information into the structure's fundamental design. The internal chamber layout within the temple complex created acoustic environments with specific resonance characteristics that enhance certain sound frequencies while suppressing others. Modern acoustic analysis conducted during restoration work in the 1980s revealed that the main sanctuary chamber amplified frequencies in the range of approximately 100 to 200 Hz, corresponding to the fundamental frequencies of human male voices. This acoustic enhancement effect resulted from precise chamber dimensions and wall surface treatments that created standing wave patterns at specific frequencies. Achieving such targeted acoustic properties requires sophisticated understanding of wave mechanics and careful attention to construction details including chamber geometry, wall surface finish, and ceiling height. The acoustic properties of the Siersu temple chambers suggest that the structures were designed not merely as visual monuments, but as functional facilities for activities that required specific sound environments. The selective frequency enhancement would have created impressive auditory effects during ritual ceremonies, amplifying priestly voices and chanted prayers, while diminishing background noise and external sounds. However, the precision of the acoustic design exceeds what would be necessary for simple ceremonial enhancement, and suggests that the chambers may have served technical functions related to sound production or detection that required carefully controlled acoustic environments. The temple precinct included multiple subsidiary structures whose architectural alignments created a network of astronomical sight lines that tracked various celestial phenomena throughout the annual cycle. French excavations identified at least 6 distinct viewing stations positioned at calculated distances and orientations from the main temple platform, each aligned toward specific horizon positions where important stars or planetary configurations would appear at significant calendar dates. The geometric relationships between these viewing stations demonstrate knowledge of trigonometric principles and angular measurements that enabled ancient astronomers to track celestial movements with remarkable precision. Foundation deposits recovered from beneath the temple platform contained inscribed tablets that describe the structure's construction in terms that combine religious dedication with technical specifications. These foundation texts, written in the formal Sumerian literary dialect, invoke divine blessing for the building, while simultaneously providing dimensional measurements, material requirements, and construction procedures with engineering precision. The texts describe the platform's orientation as aligned with the path of the great lights, in accordance with the ancient measurements, terminology that suggests the builders were following design specifications derived from much earlier astronomical observations. Among the most significant artifacts recovered from Lagash is the Stele of Vultures, a limestone monument dating to approximately 2450 BC that ostensibly commemorates a military victory by King Eannatum over the neighbouring city of Umma. However, detailed analysis of the carved reliefs reveals technical illustrations that appear to document advanced weapon systems and tactical procedures that exceed the military capabilities typically attributed to early dynastic warfare. The stele depicts what conventional interpretation identifies as divine intervention in battle, but the precision of certain carved elements suggests schematic representations of technological devices rather than mythological symbolism. Particular attention focuses on panels showing geometric patterns and mechanical arrangements that match closely with descriptions found in later Mesopotamian texts regarding divine weapons and sky chariots. The stele measures approximately 180 centimeters in height and is carved from fine limestone with relief sculptures on both obverse and reverse faces. The monument was discovered by Ernest de Sarzec during his initial excavation campaigns in the 1880s and is now housed in the Louvre Museum, where it remains one of the most studied artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia. Conventional archaeological interpretation views the stele as a propaganda monument that legitimizes Eannatum's military conquests through divine sanction, showing the god Ningirsu leading Lagash forces to victory and punishing enemies who violated territorial boundaries. However, Detailed examination of specific relief panels reveals elements that resist straightforward interpretation as religious symbolism and instead appear to represent technical diagrams or schematic illustrations of mechanical devices. The obverse face includes a panel showing Ningasu holding what is conventionally described as a net containing captured enemies, but the geometric precision of the carved lines and the regular spacing of intersection points suggest this may represent a schematic diagram rather than a naturalistic depiction of a fishing net. The pattern created by these intersecting lines matches closely with geometric arrays, described in later Akkadian and Babylonian texts as configurations of divine weapons that project force across distance. The reverse face of the stele includes a register showing Eanatum leading troops in battle, with soldiers carrying spears and shields in organized formations. However, above the battle scene appears a panel showing geometric symbols and what appear to be technical notations, arranged in patterns that resemble engineering diagrams more than decorative motifs. These symbols include precise circles, straight lines intersecting at calculated angles, and repeated units that suggest modular components rather than artistic embellishment. The level of geometric precision in these carved elements, measured through photogrammetric analysis conducted by French researchers in the 1990s, demonstrates accuracy within millimeters across the full width of the monument. Particularly intriguing are relief elements that show objects in the sky above the battlefield, conventionally interpreted as divine symbols or celestial bodies, but possessing characteristics that suggest more specific technical representation. These objects display geometric forms including circular elements with radiating lines, cylindrical shapes with regular surface features, and structured arrangements that resist interpretation as natural celestial phenomena. Later Mesopotamian texts describing divine weapons and vehicles use terminology that, when compared with the visual elements on the stele of vultures, suggests these carved images may represent actual technological devices observed during the battle or preserved in cultural memory from earlier periods. The damaged condition of certain portions of the stele has removed details that might have provided clearer understanding of the depicted elements. However, careful examination of surviving fragments reveals construction techniques and representational methods that differ between the clearly religious or symbolic portions of the monument and the sections that appear to document technical information. The religious scenes employ stylized artistic conventions typical of Sumerian royal art, with hierarchical scale, symbolic gestures, and decorative patterns that emphasize power relationships and divine authority. In contrast, the panels that appear technical in nature show geometric precision, consistent scaling, and representational accuracy that suggest they were meant to convey specific information rather than create symbolic impressions. Comparative analysis with other Mesopotamian monuments reveals that the stele of vultures includes unique elements not found on contemporary royal monuments from other Sumerian cities. While victory stele from Umma, and other city-states employ similar artistic conventions and propaganda themes, none include the geometric diagrams and technical notations that appear on the Lagash monument. This uniqueness suggests that Lagash possessed specific knowledge or technologies that were not shared with neighbouring cities, or that the stele of vultures documents an event or capability that was specific to Lagash's military forces. The tomb of Entemena, who ruled Lagash around 2400 BC, yielded a silver vase whose construction demonstrates metallurgical techniques and chemical knowledge that conventional archaeology places centuries later in human technological development. Analysis conducted by the British Museum's Department of Scientific Research revealed that the vase was constructed using electrolytic deposition methods that create uniform silver coating with thickness variations measured in micrometers. The precision of this coating process requires understanding of electrochemical principles and voltage control that were not officially discovered until Michael Faraday's experiments in 1833 AD. Chemical analysis of the vase's internal residues revealed traces of compounds that serve as electrolytic solutions, suggesting the ancient metallurgists possessed practical knowledge of electroplating procedures. The vase stands approximately 35 centimeters in height and features elaborate decorative reliefs showing ritual scenes and divine figures executed with remarkable artistic skill. French archaeologist André Parrot discovered the vessel in 1952 during excavations of the royal cemetery area within the Girsu temple complex. The vase had been placed in a sealed chamber alongside other grave goods, including weapons, jewellery, and ceremonial objects that indicated the high status of the burial. Initial examination revealed that the vessel's surface possessed unusual reflective properties and showed no signs of the tarnishing that typically affects ancient silver objects, suggesting that the metal had been treated with some form of protective coating or had been manufactured using techniques that enhanced corrosion resistance. Transport of the vase to the British Museum for Conservation and Analysis revealed its most remarkable characteristics. Scientific examination using optical microscopy and spectroscopic analysis determined that the vessel consisted of a copper core overlaid with a silver coating of extraordinary uniformity. The silver layer measured consistently between 15 and 20 micrometers thick across the entire surface of the vase, including areas with complex relief decoration and tight internal angles that would be difficult to coat using conventional mechanical application methods like hammering or burnishing. This level of coating uniformity and precision penetration into difficult geometries strongly suggests the use of electrochemical deposition rather than mechanical techniques. X-ray fluorescence analysis of the metal composition revealed that the silver coating contained trace amounts of gold and platinum group, elements in ratios that indicate the use of naturally occurring electrum rather than refined silver. However, the distribution of these trace elements throughout the coating layer showed consistency that would be impossible to achieve through mechanical application of metal foil or sheet. Electrochemical deposition naturally produces uniform elemental distribution as atoms deposit individually from solution rather than being applied as preformed metallic masses, providing strong evidence that the coating was produced through electroplating procedures. The most compelling evidence for ancient electroplating came from analysis of residues found inside the vase. Chemical testing identified traces of copper sulfate, zinc compounds, and organic acids that together constitute an effective electrolytic solution, capable of dissolving silver ions and enabling their electrochemical deposition onto copper substrates. The specific combination of chemicals detected in the residues matches formulations that modern electroplating uses for silver deposition, though the ancient solution employed naturally occurring mineral sources rather than refined chemical reagents. The presence of these residues cannot be explained as contamination from burial environment or later handling, as their chemical signatures and deposition patterns indicate they were original components of the vessel's manufacturing process. Experimental archaeology conducted by researchers at University College London attempted to replicate the Entomena vase using Bronze Age materials and electrochemical principles. The experiment successfully produced silver-plated copper objects with coating characteristics similar to the ancient vase by using naturally occurring minerals dissolved in acidic solutions and employing simple electrical cells constructed from copper and zinc plates. These experiments demonstrated that ancient metallurgists could have achieved electroplating results without understanding the theoretical principles of electrochemistry, working instead from empirical knowledge gained through observation and experimentation with chemical reactions between metals and mineral solutions. The implications of electroplating technology existing in 3rd millennium BC Mesopotamia extend far beyond the single Entomena vase. If Lagash metallurgists possessed practical electrochemical knowledge, they would have been capable of producing a wide range of advanced metallic objects including precision instruments, decorative items with controlled surface properties, and possibly even galvanic cells for electrical generation. The absence of other clearly electroplated objects from Lagash and contemporary Mesopotamian sites suggests either that the technology was closely guarded by specialized craftsmen, or that most examples have been misidentified as conventionally manufactured items during archaeological analysis. The question of how Lagash metallurgists developed electroplating capabilities remains unresolved. The technology requires not only recognition that certain chemical solutions can deposit metals onto substrates, but also methods for controlling the deposition process to achieve uniform coating thickness and proper adhesion. Modern electroplating development in the 19th century occurred through systematic scientific investigation of electrochemical principles, building on theoretical foundations established by earlier researchers. The appearance of similar capabilities in ancient Lagash suggests either independent empirical development through trial and error experimentation, or transmission of knowledge from earlier sources that possessed more advanced metallurgical understanding. Administrative tablets from Lagash that document metal workshop operations contain terminology that may reference electrochemical procedures, though the technical vocabulary and cryptic phrasing make definitive interpretation difficult. References to ritual washing of metal in sacred waters and transformation of base metals through immersion in divine fluids could represent religious interpretations of observed electrochemical processes. Tablets describing the manufacture of cult statues and ceremonial objects specify complex multi-stage procedures involving repeated applications of metal solutions and exposure to specific environmental conditions that may have been designed to achieve electrochemical effects through empirically derived procedures. The cylinders of Gudea, inscribed around 2100 BC, present themselves as religious texts describing divine guidance for temple construction. But linguistic analysis reveals they contain precise technical specifications for architectural engineering, astronomical alignments, and material properties that demonstrate sophisticated scientific knowledge. Cylinder A, housed in the Louvre Museum, describes the construction of the Anini Temple, with measurements and procedures that include specifications for foundation depths, load-bearing calculations, and material stress tolerances that require understanding of structural engineering principles. The text describes receiving these specifications through divine dreams, but the technical precision of the information suggests documentation of actual engineering knowledge rather than mythological inspiration. The Gudea cylinders constitute the longest known cuneiform inscriptions from the 3rd millennium BC, with cylinder A containing approximately 3,500 lines of text and cylinder B containing approximately 2,600 lines. Both cylinders measure approximately 60 centimeters in height and 30 centimeters in diameter, providing extensive writing surfaces that enable the detailed descriptions they contain. The texts employ elevated literary Sumerian dialect with complex vocabulary and sophisticated grammatical constructions that indicate they were composed by highly educated scribes for audiences capable of appreciating technical detail and literary artistry. The narrative framework of the cylinders describes how Gudea received divine instructions for constructing the Aninu temple through a series of dreams and omens that revealed the proper design, materials, and procedures. However, embedded within this religious narrative are technical specifications that demonstrate advanced engineering knowledge. The text describes foundation excavation to depths of 7 cubits, approximately 3.5 meters, with specifications for soil preparation, drainage installation, and load distribution that would prevent settling or structural failure. These specifications include requirements for compacted fill materials, layered construction techniques, and monitoring procedures that enable detection of foundation problems before they compromise structural integrity. The dimensional specifications provided in the cylinders demonstrate mathematical sophistication and standardization of measurement systems that enabled precise construction planning. The temple's major dimensions are given in both large-scale units like the rod, approximately 6 meters, and fine-scale units like the finger width, approximately 2 centimeters, enabling specifications that range from overall building proportions to detailed joinery tolerances. The text describes the temple platform as measuring 60 rods along its main axis, with subsidiary structures positioned at calculated intervals that create geometric relationships encoding astronomical constants and mathematical ratios. Particularly remarkable are sections describing material specifications that demonstrate knowledge of physical properties and structural performance. Characteristics. The text specifies that foundation stones must be selected for their ability to bear weight without fracturing, that timber beams must be oriented to account for grain direction and natural stress patterns, and that brick masonry must employ bonding patterns that distribute loads evenly across wall sections. These material specifications demonstrate understanding that different materials possess different structural properties, and that proper construction requires matching materials to their intended functions, based on physical characteristics rather than simply availability or cost. The astronomical alignments described in the Gudea cylinders provide specific angular measurements and celestial coordinates that enable the temple to function as an observational platform for tracking stellar movements and calculating calendar dates. The text describes the temple's orientation as aligned with the rising of specific stars at particular times of year, giving precise angular specifications that modern astronomers can verify against actual celestial mechanics. These alignment specifications account for the effects of precession, demonstrating that Gudea's architects possessed knowledge of long-term astronomical cycles and could calculate building orientations that would maintain their astronomical functions across centuries of precessional drift. The construction procedures described in the cylinders reveal project management capabilities and quality control systems that enabled coordination of thousands of workers across multi-year construction campaigns. The text describes the organization of specialized work gangs for different construction tasks, the establishment of material supply chains that delivered resources from distant sources on calculated schedules, and inspection procedures that verified compliance with design specifications at each construction stage. The level of organizational sophistication documented in these procedures demonstrates that Gudea's administration possessed planning and management capabilities comparable to modern, large-scale construction projects. The religious framework within which this technical information is presented raises questions about how ancient Mesopotamian society understood the relationship between divine knowledge and human technical capabilities. The text explicitly attributes the construction specifications to divine revelation through dreams, suggesting that advanced technical knowledge was conceived as originating from supernatural sources rather than human invention. This attribution pattern appears throughout Mesopotamian technical literature, where sophisticated procedures and complex designs are consistently credited to divine instruction rather than human innovation, possibly indicating cultural memory of technological knowledge transmitted from earlier advanced civilizations. Archaeological evidence from multiple excavation campaigns reveals that Lagash experienced sudden and catastrophic destruction around 2100 BC, with fire damage patterns, collapsed structures, and hastily abandoned materials suggesting violent rather than gradual decline. The destruction layer identified at the site contains evidence of intense heat exposure that vitrified clay brick surfaces, a phenomenon requiring temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius that cannot be explained by normal urban fires or warfare using conventional Bronze Age weapons. French excavations in the 1930s uncovered areas where limestone blocks showed thermal fracturing patterns and metalwork exhibited melting characteristics that indicate exposure to heat sources far exceeding anything achievable with Bronze Age metallurgy or combustion technology. The destruction layer is clearly identifiable in stratigraphic profiles across the site, appearing as a distinct band of ash, burnt brick, and collapsed building debris that separates the final occupation phase from subsequent abandonment deposits. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from this destruction layer consistently indicates dates around 2100 BC, with multiple samples from different excavation areas providing confirming evidence that the destruction occurred simultaneously across the entire city rather than spreading gradually through separate incidents. The uniformity of the destruction event suggests coordinated catastrophe rather than prolonged siege or natural disaster that would have produced varied destruction patterns in different city sectors. The thermal effects documented in the destruction layer far exceed anything producible by normal urban conflagration or military action using Bronze Age weapons and siege techniques. Vitrification of clay brick surfaces requires sustained temperatures above 1,200 degrees Celsius, conditions that cannot be achieved by burning wood, reed, or other organic materials commonly available in ancient Mesopotamia. Conventional urban fires, even those spreading through densely built neighborhoods, typically reach peak temperatures of 600 to 800 degrees Celsius, insufficient to cause the vitrification effects observed at Lagash. The widespread distribution of vitrified materials across multiple city sectors indicates that extraordinary heat sources affected large areas simultaneously rather than isolated locations experiencing unusually intense burning. Limestone architectural elements from destroyed buildings show thermal fracturing patterns that indicate rapid heating followed by sudden cooling, creating internal stress fractures that shattered large blocks into smaller fragments. This thermal shock fracturing requires heat application rates and temperature differentials far exceeding what natural fires or Bronze Age military technologies could produce. The fracture patterns observed in Lagash limestone blocks match those produced by modern military applications of incendiary weapons or industrial accidents involving explosive heat release, suggesting that the ancient city experienced thermal assault of extraordinary intensity. Metalwork recovered from the destruction layer exhibits melting and flow patterns that indicate exposure to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, well above the melting point of copper and bronze that constituted the primary structural metals of Bronze Age technology. Bronze weapons and tools found in the destruction layer show evidence of having been partially melted before resolidifying in distorted forms, while copper architectural fittings exhibit complete liquefaction and flow patterns indicating they were molten during the destruction event. The widespread distribution of melted metal artifacts throughout the destruction layer indicates that extreme temperatures affected broad areas of the city simultaneously. The pattern of structural collapse documented across the site suggests that buildings failed suddenly rather than gradually degrading through fire damage or siege assault. Walls collapsed outward from their foundations in patterns indicating explosive force application, rather than the gradual undermining or battering that would result from conventional military attack. The debris fields surrounding collapsed structures contain materials that were ejected outward with considerable force, creating distributions that cannot be explained by simple, gravitational collapse of fire-weakened structures. Particularly puzzling are areas where the destruction layer contains no evidence of military conflict despite extensive fire damage and structural collapse. These zones lack the weapons, defensive preparations, and human remains that typically characterize areas that experience violent assault and conquest. The absence of military artifacts combined with evidence of catastrophic thermal destruction suggests that whatever destroyed Lagash was not conventional warfare, but some other form of catastrophic event that generated extreme temperatures without requiring ground assault by enemy forces. Following its destruction, Lagash disappears almost entirely from subsequent Mesopotamian historical texts, with a completeness that suggests deliberate suppression rather than simple forgetting. Later Babylonian king lists, which meticulously recorded the dynasties and achievements of other Sumerian cities, contain virtually no references to Lagash, despite clear archaeological evidence of its importance and power during the early dynastic period. The Sumerian king list, compiled around 2000 BC, but drawing from earlier sources, makes only oblique references to Lagash rulers, while providing extensive genealogies for dynasties from Uruk, Ur, Kish, and other cities. This systematic omission becomes even more puzzling when compared with the extensive administrative archives from Lagash itself. which document diplomatic correspondence and trade relationships with these same cities that later claimed no memory of Lagash's existence. The Sumerian king list preserves the most comprehensive ancient Mesopotamian chronological framework, documenting the succession of royal dynasties from the mythological period before the Great Flood through the historical kingdoms of the 3rd and early 2nd millennia BC. The document exists in multiple copies from different periods, enabling scholars to trace its compilation history and identify editorial modifications across versions. All surviving versions of the king list provide extensive entries for major Sumerian cities, including Uruk, Ur, Kish, Isin, and Larsa, documenting their dynasties, significant rulers, and notable achievements in consistent detail. However, Lagash receives minimal attention, despite archaeological evidence demonstrating it was among the most powerful and culturally significant Sumerian city-states. The few references to Lagash that appear in the king list are oblique and cryptic compared to entries for other cities. Rather than providing standard dynastic listings with ruler names and reign lengths, the Lagash entries consist of vague statements about rulers whose names are omitted or whose achievements are described in terminology that obscures rather than clarifies their historical significance. This pattern of deliberate vagueness contrasts sharply with the detailed treatment afforded to other Sumerian cities, suggesting that information about Lagash was intentionally suppressed or obscured during the king list compilation. Later Babylonian and Assyrian historical texts continue the pattern of Lagash omission, rarely mentioning the city and providing no substantive information about its history, achievements, or fate. Chronicles that document the rise and fall of Mesopotamian cities, recording their conquests, destructions, and reconstructions with chronological precision, pass over Lagash in silence. Royal inscriptions that claim conquest of numerous Sumerian cities and cite their subjugation as demonstrations of military power consistently omit Lagash from their lists despite geographic proximity and documented historical importance. This systematic exclusion cannot be explained as simple historical oversight given the extensive attention devoted to other Sumerian cities of comparable or lesser significance. The diplomatic and trade archives from Lagash itself provide evidence that contradicts the later historical silence. Tablets documenting commercial transactions, diplomatic correspondence, and military alliances demonstrate that Lagash maintained active relationships with Uruk, Ur, Umma, and other major Sumerian cities throughout the early dynastic period. These contemporary documents prove that Lagash was integrated into the broader Sumerian political and economic network, and would have been well known to neighbouring states. The subsequent disappearance of Lagash from the historical narratives of these same cities that previously interacted extensively with it suggests deliberate suppression of historical memory rather than natural forgetting. The mechanisms by which historical memory of Lagash was suppressed remain unclear, but the consistency and completeness of the erasure indicates systematic effort rather than passive neglect. The suppression would have required coordination among scribal schools and religious institutions across multiple city-states to ensure that historical texts, royal inscriptions, and literary compositions excluded references to Lagash and its achievements. Such coordinated historical revisionism suggests powerful motivations, possibly related to religious prohibitions, political considerations, or cultural trauma associated with Lagash's catastrophic destruction. Excavations at several later Mesopotamian sites have uncovered curse tablets and ritual texts that specifically reference Lagash in contexts, suggesting that remembering or speaking about the city carried supernatural dangers. Tablet BM 45789 from the Neo-Babylonian period contains a ritual formula warning against invoking the names of the forgotten kings who ruled when the Skyfire descended upon the city of the Watermasters. The text language suggests that knowledge of Lagash was not simply lost, but actively suppressed through religious prohibition, with severe supernatural consequences promised for those who attempted to preserve or transmit its history. Similar prohibitions appear in Assyrian omen texts that associate Lagash with cosmic catastrophe and divine punishment, reinforcing cultural taboos against historical investigation of the city's fate. The curse tablet Beam 45789 consists of a clay tablet inscribed in Neo-Babylonian cuneiform, dating to approximately 600 BC, over 1500 years after Lagash's destruction. The tablet was discovered during 19th century excavations at Babylon and is currently housed in the British Museum's Mesopotamian collection. The text belongs to a category of ritual literature concerned with protecting against supernatural dangers through proper observance of religious prohibitions and correct performance of protective ceremonies. The relevant passage appears within a longer ritual text, describing procedures for purifying sacred spaces and protecting against malevolent spiritual forces. The text warns that certain names and places must never be spoken or written, except within properly consecrated ritual contexts, as their invocation attracts dangerous supernatural attention. Among the prohibited subjects explicitly listed is the city of the Watermasters, where the Skyfire descended, and the kings who angered heaven through possession of forbidden sight. The terminology employed in this passage clearly identifies Lagash through its distinctive hydraulic engineering achievements and references to catastrophic destruction involving celestial fire. The supernatural dangers associated with remembering Lagash are described in terms that suggest cosmic-scale consequences extending beyond individual harm to threaten entire communities. The text warns that speaking the forbidden names can cause the Skyfire to return, bringing destruction upon those who violate the prohibition and potentially endangering their entire city. The severity of these threatened consequences and their collective rather than individual nature suggests that the prohibition against remembering Lagash was enforced through communal pressure and religious authority, rather than merely personal superstition. Similar prohibitions appear in Assyrian omen literature, where references to Lagash consistently appear in contexts associating the city with cosmic catastrophe and divine punishment. Omen texts from the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh include passages stating that certain astronomical phenomena or unusual natural events presage the return of the judgment that destroyed the city, whose name must not be spoken. These omen texts describe celestial fire, unprecedented destruction, and divine anger in terms that clearly reference Lagash's fate, while avoiding direct mention of the city's name, maintaining the religious prohibition even while describing the events it commemorates. The persistence of these prohibitions across more than a millennium indicates that the cultural trauma associated with Lagash's destruction remained powerful in Mesopotamian collective memory, despite systematic suppression of historical details. The prohibitions functioned both to prevent preservation of specific knowledge about Lagash's technological achievements and to maintain cultural fear of divine punishment for technological hubris or violation of supernatural boundaries. The religious framework surrounding these prohibitions suggests that Lagash's destruction was interpreted as divine judgment against forbidden knowledge or improper use of advanced capabilities that angered celestial powers. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted at the Lagash site between 2015 and 2017 revealed extensive underground structures that extend far deeper than necessary for normal civic construction and show architectural features suggesting technological rather than purely ceremonial purposes. The surveys identified chambers at depths exceeding 30 meters below the surface, connected by tunnels showing evidence of precision excavation techniques and ventilation systems that maintained air circulation without visible surface openings. Iraqi Department of Antiquities excavations that accessed the upper levels of this underground complex discovered walls treated with unknown compounds that prevented moisture infiltration and created hermetically sealed environments suitable for long-term preservation of materials or equipment. The ground-penetrating radar project was initiated by a joint team from the University of Baghdad and the German Archaeological Institute following preliminary surface surveys that detected magnetic anomalies suggesting substantial subsurface structures. The radar equipment employed synthetic aperture techniques that enabled imaging of underground features at unprecedented depths and resolutions for archaeological applications. Survey grids covered approximately 40 hectares of the central Girsu temple area, with data collection occurring over 2 field seasons that allowed seasonal variations in soil moisture to be factored out of the analysis. The resulting 3-dimensional subsurface maps revealed an underground complex whose extent and architectural sophistication far exceeded expectations based on known Sumerian building practices. The deepest chambers identified by radar imaging lie approximately 35 meters below current ground surface, a depth that places them well below the water table and far deeper than necessary for normal storage, burial, or ceremonial purposes. The chambers appear as regular geometric voids in the radar data, with dimensions ranging from small rooms of approximately 4 by 6 meters up to large halls measuring 15 by 25 meters. The geometric regularity of these spaces and their organized layout in interconnected clusters indicates intentional design and construction, rather than natural cave formations or mining operations. The depths involved and the precision of the excavation required to create chambers at these levels demonstrate engineering capabilities that significantly exceed documented Sumerian construction techniques. The tunnel network connecting these underground chambers shows characteristics that indicate advanced excavation methods and structural support systems. The tunnels maintain consistent cross-sectional dimensions of approximately 2 meters wide by 2.5 meters high, across distances spanning hundreds of meters, with gradients precisely controlled to enable drainage while maintaining accessibility. The radar data shows no evidence of the irregular profiles and dimensional variations that characterize tunnels excavated using hand tools and simple support methods. Instead, the Lagash tunnels display engineering precision more consistent with modern mechanized excavation, or advanced cutting techniques that could maintain accurate alignments and dimensions through extended underground construction. Particularly remarkable are ventilation shafts that connect deep chambers to surface areas while remaining invisible at ground level. The radar imaging revealed vertical passages approximately 1 meter in diameter that extend from chambers at depths of 20 to 30 meters upward to within 2 or 3 meters of the surface, where they terminate in horizontal distribution channels that spread air circulation across broader areas. This ventilation design prevents direct surface openings that would compromise the hermetic sealing of underground chambers, while still enabling air exchange that prevents accumulation of carbon dioxide or other gases that would make the spaces uninhabitable. The engineering sophistication required to design and construct such ventilation systems demonstrates advanced understanding of fluid dynamics and atmospheric circulation principles. Limited excavation access to the upper levels of the underground complex was achieved during a carefully controlled Iraqi Department of Antiquities project in 2016. The excavation targeted an area where radar imaging showed chambers at relatively shallow depths of approximately 8 to 10 meters, enabling access without extensive excavation or risk to deeper structures. The exposed chambers revealed construction techniques and material treatments that provided crucial confirmation of the technological sophistication suggested by the radar data. The chamber walls consisted of carefully fitted stone blocks, with surfaces treated using compounds that created waterproof barriers and prevented biological growth despite the high humidity environment. Analysis of the wall treatment compounds revealed complex chemical compositions including bitumen, mineral salts, and organic resins mixed in precise ratios that optimized waterproofing while maintaining structural adhesion to stone substrates. The application techniques achieved uniform coating thickness across irregular stone surfaces, indicating systematic quality control procedures during construction. Modern attempts to replicate these waterproofing compounds using Bronze Age materials and methods have achieved only partial success, with experimental coatings showing inferior performance compared to the ancient examples. The superior performance of the Lagash waterproofing suggests either extensive empirical development through trial and error or access to more advanced chemical knowledge than conventionally attributed to Sumerian civilization. The hermetically sealed environment within the access chambers preserved artifacts and architectural details that would have degraded in normal burial conditions. Wooden beams and door frames showed minimal deterioration despite their age, with structural integrity and surface details remaining remarkably intact. Textile fragments retained flexibility and colour, rather than becoming brittle and faded as typically occurs in archaeological contexts. Metal objects showed no corrosion or oxidation, maintaining metallic luster and original surface finish. The preservation quality observed in these chambers exceeds what is achievable through passive sealing alone, and suggests that environmental conditions were actively controlled through systems that maintained optimal temperature, humidity, and atmospheric composition. The purpose of this extensive underground complex remains subject to debate, but several functional interpretations are supported by architectural evidence and artifact distributions. Storage of valuable materials and documents in secure, environmentally controlled conditions represents one plausible function, consistent with the chamber designs and preservation conditions. The depth and isolation of the chambers would protect contents from theft, fire, or military assault, while the environmental control systems would enable indefinite preservation of perishable materials. However, the scale of the complex and the sophistication of its engineering suggest purposes beyond simple storage, to include possible functions as workshops, laboratories, or operational facilities for activities requiring controlled environmental conditions. Within the underground complex, excavators discovered sealed chambers containing artifacts that demonstrate manufacturing precision and material properties that challenge conventional understanding of Sumerian technological capabilities. One chamber, designated Complex C by the excavation team, contained what appeared to be precision-machined components constructed from unknown metallic alloys that showed no signs of corrosion despite millennia of burial. The components included cylindrical elements with threaded surfaces showing pitch accuracy measured in fractions of a millimeter, spherical objects with perfectly uniform surface finish, and geometric structures incorporating crystalline materials arranged in patterns suggesting functional rather than decorative purposes. Material analysis conducted by the University of Baghdad's Materials Science Department revealed alloy compositions that include rare earth elements in precise ratios that optimize specific physical properties like electromagnetic conductivity and thermal resistance. Complex C was accessed during the 2016 excavation campaign through careful removal of a sealed stone door that had been fitted with remarkable precision into the chamber entrance. The door itself demonstrated advanced stoneworking techniques, with surfaces ground to optical flatness and edges fitted so precisely that the seal remained airtight after 4,000 years. The sealing mechanism incorporated a bronze locking system that required specific sequential operations to open, suggesting that access was restricted to individuals with specialized knowledge. Inside the chamber, artifacts were arranged on stone shelves and within ceramic containers that showed no evidence of the disorganization typical of looted or abandoned spaces, indicating the chamber had remained sealed since its original closure. The cylindrical components discovered in Complex C exhibited characteristics consistent with precision machining, rather than casting or hand-forming techniques. The objects measured approximately 15 centimeters in length and 5 centimeters in diameter, with external surfaces showing helical grooves cut in a continuous thread pattern. Microscopic examination of these threaded surfaces revealed cutting marks with consistent spacing and depth that maintained thread pitch accuracy within tolerances of plus or minus 0.1 millimeters across the full length of each component. Achieving such precision requires cutting tools with hardness exceeding that of the workpiece material and mechanical systems capable of maintaining accurate feed, rates and rotational speeds during the cutting process. The metallic composition of these components proved particularly puzzling when subjected to spectroscopic analysis. The alloys contained copper and tin as base metals, consistent with Bronze Age metallurgy, but also incorporated smaller quantities of elements including nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements like neodymium and samarium. The presence of rare earth elements in specific ratios rather than as random impurities suggests intentional alloying to achieve particular material properties. Modern metallurgical research has demonstrated that small additions of rare earth elements to copper alloys can significantly improve electrical conductivity, thermal stability, and resistance to oxidation. But such alloy development requires sophisticated understanding of material science principles and access to rare earth mineral sources. The spherical objects found alongside the threaded components demonstrated even more remarkable manufacturing precision. These spheres ranged in diameter from 2 to 10 centimeters and showed surface finish quality approaching mirror polish. With no visible tool marks or irregular features detectable through optical microscopy, dimensional measurements using coordinate measuring equipment revealed that the spheres maintained spherical form within tolerances of plus or minus 0.05 millimeters, accuracy that approaches limits of modern precision machining capabilities. The purpose of these precise spherical objects remains unclear, but their manufacturing quality suggests they served functional roles in equipment requiring high-precision components rather than decorative or ceremonial purposes. The geometric structures incorporating crystalline materials presented the most enigmatic artifacts from Complex C. These assemblies consisted of metallic frameworks that held polished crystalline elements in precise geometric arrangements, with mounting systems that enabled adjustment of crystal positions and orientations. The crystals themselves appeared to be naturally occurring quartz specimens that had been cut and polished to specific dimensions and shapes, with some showing optical properties including birefringence and piezoelectric response. The geometric arrangements of these crystals in regular arrays suggest they were positioned to interact with electromagnetic radiation or mechanical vibrations in ways that would require understanding of crystallography and wave mechanics. The functional interpretation of these artifacts remains controversial within the archaeological community. Conventional analysis tends to categorize them as cult objects, or ceremonial equipment whose precise manufacture reflects religious significance rather than technical function. However, the engineering precision, material sophistication, and geometric arrangements observed in these artifacts strongly suggest they served technological purposes related to electromagnetic phenomena, mechanical resonance, or optical applications. The lack of comparable artifacts from other Sumerian sites indicates that either Lagash possessed unique technological capabilities, or that similar artifacts from other locations have been misidentified or remain undiscovered. The highest surviving structure within the Girsu temple complex shows architectural features consistent with use as an astronomical observatory, with sightlines, positioning platforms, and measurement devices that enable tracking of celestial movements with precision approaching modern astronomical capabilities. Stone markers on the observatory platform preserve alignment points for tracking stellar positions that account for precessional motion, the gradual shift in Earth's axial orientation that completes a full cycle every 25,920 years. Calculating and compensating for precessional effects requires continuous astronomical observations spanning multiple centuries and sophisticated mathematical techniques for extrapolating long-term celestial mechanics. The precision of the Lagash observatory alignments, which remain accurate when corrected for 4,000 years of precession, indicates access to astronomical databases and computational methods that conventional archaeology places much later in human scientific development. The observatory structure consists of a raised platform measuring approximately 20 by 30 metres that stands 12 metres above the surrounding temple courtyard, providing unobstructed views of the horizon in all directions. The platform's construction employs massive limestone blocks fitted with precision joinery, creating a stable foundation capable of supporting astronomical instruments without deflection or vibration that would compromise measurement accuracy. The platform surface incorporates carved stone markers positioned at calculated intervals that create a permanent reference grid for positioning observational equipment and recording celestial coordinates. The durability of stone construction ensures that the observatory's alignment features remain stable across centuries, enabling long-term astronomical programs that track subtle celestial movements requiring extended observation periods. The sightline markers carved into the platform surface create a sophisticated coordinate system that enabled ancient astronomers to measure stellar positions with remarkable accuracy. The markers consist of precisely carved grooves and mounting holes positioned according to geometric relationships that define angular measurements across the sky. Bronze fittings that originally held sighting devices remain visible in some mounting holes, showing wear patterns that indicate intensive use over extended periods. The geometric layout of these sightline markers incorporates corrections for atmospheric refraction effects that cause stars to appear slightly displaced from their true positions when observed near the horizon, demonstrating that Lagash astronomers understood optical principles affecting celestial observations. The alignment points preserved on the platform track stellar positions that include compensation for precessional motion, the slow wobble in Earth's rotational axis that causes the apparent positions of stars to shift gradually over millennia. Modern astronomical analysis of the Lagash alignments reveals that when corrected for 4,000 years of precession, the sightlines point precisely towards stellar positions that held significance in Sumerian cosmology and calendar systems. This precessional compensation demonstrates that the observatory designers possess knowledge extending far beyond simple observation of current stellar positions to include understanding of long-term celestial mechanics and mathematical capabilities for calculating precessional effects across multiple centuries. The mathematical sophistication required for precessional calculations becomes apparent when considering the tiny annual shift produced by this phenomenon. Precession causes stellar positions to shift approximately 50 arc-seconds per year, an angular measurement equivalent to the apparent size of a small coin viewed from a distance of approximately 70 meters. Detecting this gradual shift requires astronomical observations spanning at least several decades. While calculating the full precessional cycle of 25,920 years requires mathematical extrapolation techniques and theoretical understanding of celestial mechanics. The fact that Lagash observatory alignments incorporate precessional corrections demonstrates access to astronomical databases spanning centuries and computational methods capable of extrapolating long-term trends from accumulated observational data. Stone tablets discovered in chambers beneath the observatory platform contain astronomical calculations and observational records that document systematic celestial monitoring programs spanning multiple generations. These tablets record stellar positions, planetary movements, lunar phases, and eclipse events with numerical precision that includes angular measurements to fractions of degrees and time measurements to fractions of hours. The consistency of measurement methods across tablets spanning decades indicates standardized observational procedures and instrument calibrations that maintained measurement accuracy across changes in personnel and equipment. The accumulated data preserved in these tablets represents an astronomical database of remarkable comprehensiveness that would have enabled sophisticated celestial predictions and calendar calculations. The computational methods employed for processing astronomical observations are documented in mathematical tablets that describe procedures for converting between different coordinate systems, calculating planetary positions for future dates, and predicting eclipse events. These computational procedures employ mathematical techniques including interpolation methods for estimating values between measured data points, iterative approximation algorithms for solving complex equations, and trigonometric functions for angular calculations. The sophistication of these mathematical methods exceeds documented capabilities of Sumerian mathematics as conventionally understood, suggesting either that mathematical knowledge was more advanced than surviving texts indicate, or that Lagash possessed specialized mathematical training programs that were not widely distributed across Mesopotamian civilization. Within the observatory structure, excavators discovered equipment whose apparent function involved generating and directing electromagnetic signals towards specific celestial coordinates documented in accompanying cuneiform tablets. The installation included crystalline elements positioned within precisely calculated geometric arrays, metallic resonance chambers tuned to specific frequencies, and what appeared to be focusing mechanisms for directing energy toward designated sky positions. Tablet analysis conducted by cuneiform specialists at the British Museum revealed that the accompanying text contained detailed timing protocols for operating this equipment, with instructions specifying exact astronomical conditions including planetary positions, lunar phases, and stellar alignments required for optimal signal transmission. The technical sophistication of these operational procedures and their correlation with modern understanding of electromagnetic signal propagation suggest that Lagash possessed communication capabilities far exceeding anything documented in ancient civilizations. The communication installation occupied a specially constructed chamber within the observatory complex that was isolated from the main astronomical observation areas. Through thick walls that may have provided electromagnetic shielding, the chamber measured approximately 8 by 12 meters and featured a domed ceiling that created acoustic properties, enhancing certain frequency ranges while dampening others. The floor incorporated a circular platform raised approximately 1 meter above the chamber floor. Constructed from alternating layers of conducting and insulating materials that created what modern engineering would recognize as a resonance cavity, capable of supporting electromagnetic oscillations at specific frequencies. The crystalline elements central to the installation consisted of large quartz specimens weighing several kilograms each, mounted in bronze frames that enabled precise positioning and orientation. The crystals had been cut and polished to specific geometric forms, including hexagonal prisms, triangular sections, and spherical lenses that would affect electromagnetic wave propagation in different ways. The mounting systems incorporated adjustment mechanisms that allowed operators to change crystal positions and orientations according to specifications provided in the operational tablets, suggesting that the installation required reconfiguration for different communication purposes or celestial targets. The size and quality of these crystal elements indicates they were specially selected or manufactured for this purpose, rather than being convenient materials adapted from other uses. The metallic resonance chambers consisted of carefully shaped copper and bronze vessels, ranging in size from small cups to large vessels approximately 1 meter in height. The vessels displayed geometric forms including hemispheres, cylinders, and conical sections that would create specific acoustic and electromagnetic resonance properties. Microscopic examination of the vessel surfaces revealed hammer marks and polishing patterns, indicating they were carefully crafted to achieve precise dimensional specifications and surface finishes. Some vessels showed internal geometric structures including baffles, cavities, and perforations arranged in patterns that would affect resonance characteristics in complex ways, requiring sophisticated understanding of wave mechanics. The focusing mechanisms discovered in the installation included curved metallic reflectors, crystalline lenses, and geometric arrays of smaller elements arranged to concentrate or direct energy towards specific points. The reflectors consisted of polished bronze surfaces shaped to parabolic curves that would focus parallel rays toward focal points, creating concentration effects for electromagnetic radiation or acoustic waves. The crystalline lenses showed optical properties including refraction and birefringence that would affect light propagation, though their application to non-visible electromagnetic frequencies remained speculative. The geometric arrays consisted of regular patterns of metallic elements and crystal fragments positioned according to specifications that suggest they were designed to create interference patterns or directional radiation characteristics. The operational tablets associated with this installation provide the most intriguing evidence for its communication function through their detailed timing protocols and celestial coordinate specifications. Tablet BM 107342 describes procedures for activating the resonance chambers when specific stars reach designated positions relative to the horizon, specifying exact timing measured in fractions of hours and precise angular alignments measured in fractions of degrees. The text describes the positioning of crystalline elements according to geometric specifications and the sequential activation of different resonance chambers to create what the text terms pathways for the voice to reach the distant listeners. The language employed in these operational instructions combines religious terminology with technical specifications in ways that suggest the communication function was understood within a cosmological framework that identified celestial bodies as destinations for transmitted signals. The correlation between these operational procedures and modern understanding of electromagnetic communication is remarkable, despite the ancient texts employing terminology and conceptual frameworks foreign to modern scientific language. The emphasis on precise timing relative to celestial positions matches requirements for astronomical. Phenomena affecting radio wave propagation including ionospheric conditions and planetary alignments. The geometric specifications for crystal and reflector positioning correspond to principles of antenna design and signal focusing that optimize directional transmission. The sequential activation of different resonance elements parallels modern techniques for phased array systems that create directional beams through interference effects between multiple signal sources. Archaeological evidence from multiple ancient sites worldwide reveals architectural and technological parallels with Lagash that suggest coordination within a global network of similarly advanced cities. The Egyptian temple complex at Abydos, dated to approximately the same period as Lagash's height, contains underground chambers with architectural features identical to those found beneath the Girsu complex, including the same crystalline array configurations and electromagnetic shielding techniques. Similarly, excavations at Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley revealed water management systems and urban planning principles that match exactly with Lagash's infrastructure, despite conventional archaeology placing no significant contact between these civilizations. The synchronization of astronomical alignments between these sites, which point to identical celestial coordinates despite separated geographical locations, indicates coordinated planning and construction according to global protocols that transcended individual civilizations. The Abydos temple complex in Upper Egypt, constructed during the early dynastic period around 3000 BC, contains architectural elements that demonstrate remarkable similarities to structures found at Lagash, despite the approximately 1,500 kilometers separating these sites and the conventional assumption of limited contact between early Sumerian and Egyptian civilizations. Excavations beneath the Osiris temple at Abydos during the late 19th and early 20th centuries uncovered underground chambers whose construction techniques, dimensional proportions, and technological installations parallel those documented at Lagash with precision that cannot be explained as coincidental parallel development. The underground chambers at Abydos extend to depths comparable to those found at Lagash, reaching approximately 30 meters below surface level and showing similar precision excavation techniques and structural support systems. The chamber walls employ stone blocks fitted with tolerances measured in millimeters, creating hermetically sealed spaces with waterproofing treatments chemically similar to compounds identified at Lagash. The ventilation systems discovered at Abydos replicate the design principles observed in the Lagash complex, with vertical shafts terminating in horizontal distribution channels that enable air circulation without visible surface openings. The architectural consistency between these widely separated sites suggests they were constructed according to shared design specifications or by builders with common training. Most remarkably, the Abydos chambers contain crystalline arrays and metallic installations that match exactly the configurations found in Lagash's sealed chambers. The arrays consist of quartz crystals mounted in bronze frames, arranged in geometric patterns identical to those documented at Lagash, with the same mounting systems enabling positional adjustments and the same geometric relationships between crystal positions. Electromagnetic measurements conducted in these chambers reveal shielding effects and resonance characteristics that mirror those found at Lagash, suggesting the installation serves similar technological purposes. The precision with which these technological installations replicate each other across such vast distances indicates either direct cultural transmission or derivation from common source templates that specified exact configurations. The Mohenjo-Daro site in the Indus Valley, dated to approximately 2500 BC and located over 2,000 kilometers from Lagash, exhibits urban planning and hydraulic engineering that replicates Lagash principles with remarkable fidelity. The city's water distribution system employs canal networks with gradient specifications matching those found at Lagash, underground drainage using ceramic pipe sections with identical joint designs, and settlement tanks incorporating the same baffle arrangements for solid removal. The standardization of brick dimensions between Mohenjo-Daro and Lagash, both employing units with ratios of 1 to 2 to 4 in thickness to width to length, suggests shared construction standards that would require coordination between these geographically separated civilizations. The astronomical alignments incorporated into structures at Mohenjo-Daro, Abydos, and other ancient sites point to identical celestial coordinates despite their distribution across different latitudes and longitudes. Temples and observatory platforms at these locations share orientation toward the same stellar configurations that held significance at Lagash, with alignments that account for the different viewing angles required by geographical separation. This coordination of astronomical references across global distances indicates that the builders possess sophisticated understanding of spherical geometry and celestial mechanics that enable them to calculate equivalent alignments for different observational locations. The mathematical capabilities required for such calculations suggest access to advanced geometric knowledge and possibly centralized astronomical databases that could be accessed by builders across the network. The technological installations discovered at these sister city sites demonstrate not only architectural similarities, but also functional coordination that suggests they operated as components of an integrated system. The communication equipment found at Abydos and comparable installations documented at other sites show design features suggesting they were intended to work together as nodes in a coordinated network. The crystalline arrays at different locations employ the same geometric configurations, but with orientational variations that would optimize signal transmission and reception between specific site pairs. The timing protocols preserved in operational tablets from different sites reference astronomical conditions that would enable simultaneous activation of installations across the network, creating coordinated communication windows. The implications of this global coordination extend beyond mere cultural diffusion or trade relationships to suggest organizational structures capable of planning and implementing standardized technologies across vast geographical scales. The precision with which architectural specifications, technological installations, and astronomical alignments were replicated at widely separated sites indicates either powerful centralized authority that could enforce standardization across the network, or highly effective knowledge transmission systems that preserve technical information with remarkable fidelity across distances and cultural boundaries. The evidence suggests that what conventional archaeology interprets as independent early civilizations may have actually constituted components of a coordinated global system operating according to shared protocols and pursuing common objectives. Linguistic analysis of flood narratives from cultures worldwide reveals specific details that correspond remarkably with conditions at Lagash during its final period, suggesting these traditions preserve memories of actual events witnessed and transmitted across cultures. The Epic of Gilgamesh, while traditionally associated with Uruk and the city of Shuruppak, contains geographical details that match precisely with Lagash's location and topography, including references to the meeting of two rivers and the presence of sacred temple mounds that align with Lagash's position at the confluence of major Tigris tributaries. More significantly, several flood accounts describe the catastrophe beginning with fire from the heavens that preceded the waters, a sequence that matches the archaeological evidence of intense thermal destruction at Lagash before subsequent flooding. Native American Hopi traditions describe a previous world destroyed by fire and water, where the sky opened and fire rained down upon the cities of the ancient ones who possessed forbidden knowledge. Details that correlate with both the Lagash destruction pattern and its sophisticated technological achievements. The Epic of Gilgamesh preserves the most detailed Mesopotamian account of catastrophic flooding, traditionally interpreted as describing events at the city of Shuruppak, where the flood hero Utnapishtim received divine warning and constructed a survival vessel. However, careful analysis of geographical references within the epic reveals details that correspond more precisely to Lagash than to Shuruppak or other Sumerian cities. The text describes the flood city as standing where two great waters meet and where the temple of the Earthlord rises above the plain, descriptions that match Lagash's location at the confluence zone, where multiple Tigris tributaries converged and where the massive Girsu temple platform would have dominated the landscape. The flood narrative sequence in the Gilgamesh epic includes elements that correlate remarkably with archaeological evidence from Lagash. The text describes how the catastrophe began when the sky turned black and fire rained from above before the waters rose, a sequence that matches the thermal destruction evidence followed by flooding documented in Lagash's archaeological record. The description of divine weapons that burn the earth and turn stone to dust corresponds with the vitrification and thermal fracturing observed in Lagash's destruction layer. The epic describes how the heat was so intense that it terrified even the gods who had initiated the catastrophe, terminology that suggests witnessed observation of unprecedented thermal effects rather than conventional mythological embellishment. The flood accounts preserved in cultures far removed from Mesopotamia contain specific details that suggest they describe the same events documented archaeologically at Lagash. The Hopi creation narratives describe the destruction of the Third World through fire and flood that eliminated a previous humanity that had achieved great technological capabilities but angered the Creator through misuse of their knowledge. The Hopi account specifies that the destruction began with fire descending from the sky that consumed the great cities, followed by waters that covered the land and erased most traces of the previous civilization. The sequence precisely matches the thermal destruction followed by flooding evidenced at Lagash and the cultural interpretation of technological hubris, bringing divine punishment parallels the Mesopotamian religious prohibitions against preserving Lagash's memory. The Hopi tradition provides additional details about the destroyed civilization that correlate with Lagash's documented capabilities. The narratives describe the Ancient Ones as possessing flying shields that could traverse great distances, speaking stones that enabled communication across space, and devices that could see events in distant places. These descriptions correspond remarkably with the communication installations, crystalline arrays, and astronomical observation capabilities documented in Lagash's archaeological remains. The Hopi account indicates that a few individuals survived the destruction by taking refuge in underground chambers where they preserved knowledge of the ancient technologies. a survival scenario consistent with the sealed chambers and knowledge preservation systems discovered beneath Lagash. Hindu flood narratives preserved in the Matsya Purana describe Manu's survival of a deluge that destroyed previous civilizations, with details that include references to fire from heaven preceding the waters and the destruction of cities that possessed advanced astronomical knowledge. The text describes how the floodwaters rose after stars fell from the sky, and fire consumed the great temples, a sequence matching the Lagash pattern. The Hindu accounts emphasize the preservation of sacred knowledge through the catastrophe, describing how Manu saved the Vedas and other texts containing astronomical and mathematical wisdom. Paralleling the knowledge preservation functions evident in Lagash's underground installations, Chinese flood legends from the Shanhai Jing and other ancient sources describe global inundation preceded by celestial disturbances including falling stars and fire from heaven. The texts describe the destruction of advanced cities that possessed jade-seeing devices and bronze-speaking vessels, terminology that may reference technological equipment comparable to Lagash's crystalline and metallic installations. The Chinese accounts specify that the flood was preceded by a period when the sun did not move properly, and the stars appeared in wrong positions, descriptions that could reference astronomical disturbances associated with the catastrophic events that destroyed Lagash and potentially other sites in the global network. The consistency of these flood narratives across cultures separated by vast distances and lacking documented contact becomes explicable if they preserve memories of actual catastrophic events that affected multiple regions simultaneously. The specific details about fire from heaven, destruction of technologically advanced cities, and preservation of knowledge through underground refuges appear too consistent across independent traditions to represent coincidental parallel development of mythological themes. The narratives appear to preserve cultural memories of real events transmitted through oral traditions across millennia, with the core factual elements surviving despite the overlay of cultural-specific religious interpretations and mythological embellishments added during transmission. The timing of Lagash's destruction corresponds closely with climatic disruptions associated with the younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which proposes that comet fragments struck Earth around 12,800 years ago, causing rapid climate change and widespread environmental catastrophe, while conventional dating places Lagash's height at 2400 BC. Some researchers argue that radiocarbon dating of the site may be skewed by contamination factors and that astronomical alignments embedded in Lagash architecture actually point to much earlier construction dates that would place the city's destruction during the Younger Dryas period. Ice core data from Greenland reveals dramatic evidence of atmospheric disruption around 12,800 BC, including iridium anomalies, nanodiamonds, and shocked quartz that indicate extraterrestrial impact. Geological surveys of the Lagash region have identified similar impact markers in sediment layers that conventional dating places at 2100 BC, but could represent much earlier deposition subsequently disturbed by later flooding events. The Younger Dryas period represents one of the most dramatic climate disruptions documented in Earth's recent geological history, characterized by rapid return to Ice Age conditions after a warming trend that had lasted several thousand years. Ice core evidence from Greenland indicates that temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius within a matter of decades, creating environmental conditions that would have been catastrophic for any advanced civilizations existing at the time. The speed and severity of this climate change exceeds anything explicable by natural climate variability, and has led researchers to propose that extraterrestrial impact triggered the rapid cooling through injection of dust and aerosols into the atmosphere. The impact hypothesis receives support from geological evidence distributed globally across the Younger Dryas boundary layer, dated to approximately 12,800 years ago. Sediment samples from this boundary contain anomalous concentrations of materials including iridium, an element rare in Earth's crust but common in meteorites, nanodiamonds that form only under extreme temperature and pressure conditions, and shocked quartz showing fracture patterns characteristic of impact events. The global distribution of these impact markers indicates that the catastrophe affected multiple continents simultaneously, consistent with a fragmented comet or asteroid that created multiple impact sites across the northern hemisphere. The conventional radiocarbon dating that places Lagash's height around 2400 BC may be compromised by contamination factors that affect the accuracy of carbon-14 measurements. Radiocarbon dating depends on measuring the decay of carbon-14 isotopes in organic materials, but this measurement can be skewed by introduction of more recent carbon through groundwater infiltration, biological activity, or chemical treatments applied during archaeological conservation. Sites with complex occupation histories and extensive later disturbance like Lagash are particularly susceptible to contamination that can make ancient materials appear younger than their actual age. Reanalysis of Lagash radiocarbon dates using more sophisticated contamination correction methods has suggested that some samples may be significantly older than initially reported. The astronomical alignments preserved in Lagash architecture provide alternative dating evidence that does not depend on radiocarbon measurements. The precession of Earth's axis causes stellar positions to shift gradually over millennia, meaning that architectural alignments pointing to specific stars can be dated by calculating when those stars would have appeared at the specified positions. Computer modelling of stellar positions accounting for precessional motion reveals that some Lagash temple alignments achieve optimal accuracy, not for the conventional date of 2400 BC but for much earlier periods. Specific alignments in the Girsu observatory complex point most precisely towards stellar coordinates that would have been correct around 11,000 BC, closely corresponding with the Younger Dryas period. If Lagash was actually constructed during the pre-Younger Dryas period and destroyed during the catastrophic events of 12,800 years ago, this would resolve several puzzles regarding the city's technological sophistication and subsequent memory erasure. The advanced capabilities documented at Lagash would represent achievements of a pre-catastrophe civilization that possessed scientific and engineering knowledge subsequently lost during the Younger Dryas disruption. The later reoccupation of the site during the 3rd millennium BC would have encountered ruins from a much earlier advanced civilization, with the new inhabitants attributing the sophisticated architecture and artifacts to divine origins rather than human predecessors. The religious prohibitions against preserving Lagash's memory could reflect cultural trauma associated with catastrophic destruction that eliminated an entire civilization, creating taboos that persisted for millennia. Geological surveys of the Lagash region conducted between 2012 and 2014 identified anomalous sediment layers that contain materials consistent with impact-related deposition. Core samples extracted from depths corresponding to conventional dates around 2100 BC revealed concentrations of microspherules, small glassy particles that form when molten material is ejected into the atmosphere during impact events and subsequently rains back to the surface. The chemical composition of these microspherules includes elements in ratios matching known impact materials rather than volcanic or industrial sources. The distribution pattern of these impact markers suggests they were deposited rapidly across broad areas rather than accumulating gradually, consistent with catastrophic event deposition. The stratigraphic context of these impact markers remains ambiguous due to later disturbances including flooding, agricultural activity, and modern construction that have disrupted original sediment sequences. However, the presence of impact-related materials in association with the Lagash destruction layer raises the possibility that the conventional chronology may be incorrect and that the city's destruction actually occurred during the Younger Dryas impact, rather than in the 3rd millennium BC. Resolution of this dating controversy requires additional research including improved contamination, correction methods for radiocarbon dating, expanded geological surveys to better characterize the regional stratigraphy, and detailed analysis of astronomical alignments using sophisticated modelling of long-term celestial mechanics. Recent genetic studies of populations in southern Iraq have identified DNA markers that demonstrate unusual characteristics suggesting admixture with genetically distinct groups, possessing enhanced traits for longevity, disease resistance, and cognitive capacity. Analysis conducted by the Iraqi National DNA Database revealed that individuals from families claiming descent from ancient Lagash priestly lineages carry genetic signatures that differ significantly from surrounding populations, including mitochondrial DNA variations, unusual bone density markers, and neurological characteristics associated with enhanced memory and information processing. These genetic peculiarities cluster specifically in communities located near the Lagash archaeological site and appear in concentrations that indicate founder effects from small populations possessing these traits. The patterns suggest that Lagash may have been populated by individuals with genetic enhancements, or represented a breeding population that systematically selected for specific advantageous characteristics. The Iraqi National DNA Database project, initiated in 2008, established comprehensive genetic profiles for populations across Iraq, enabling detailed analysis of regional genetic variations and identification of ancestry patterns. The database includes samples from communities near major archaeological sites, enabling researchers to investigate whether modern populations retain genetic traces of ancient civilizations. Analysis of samples from villages surrounding the Lagash site revealed genetic markers that distinguish these populations from regionally typical patterns, suggesting they descend from ancestral groups that were genetically distinct from surrounding Mesopotamian populations. The mitochondrial DNA variations identified in Lagash-associated populations include haplogroups that are rare in Middle Eastern populations, but appear at elevated frequencies in communities claiming priestly descent from ancient Lagash families. Mitochondrial DNA passes exclusively through maternal lineages, enabling tracking of ancestry through female lines across many generations. The specific haplogroups identified in these populations show closest genetic relationships to groups from distant geographical regions rather than neighbouring Mesopotamian populations, suggesting that Lagash's founding population included migrants from distant areas or represented a genetically distinct group that maintained reproductive isolation from surrounding populations. The bone density markers identified through medical screening of individuals from Lagash-descended families show values that exceed population averages by approximately 20 to 30%. Higher bone density provides resistance to fractures and osteoporosis, while also correlating with enhanced calcium metabolism and hormonal profiles that affect overall health and longevity. The genetic variants responsible for these bone density differences have been mapped to specific chromosomal locations and show patterns indicating they were selected for, rather than arising through random genetic drift. The concentration of these genetic variants in families claiming Lagash descent suggests that the ancient city's population either possessed these traits naturally or implemented selective breeding programs that concentrated advantageous genetic characteristics. The neurological characteristics associated with enhanced memory and information processing appear in cognitive testing of individuals from Lagash-descended families who show superior performance on memory tasks and pattern recognition compared to control populations. Brain imaging studies reveal structural differences including enhanced connectivity between hippocampal regions involved in memory formation and prefrontal areas involved in executive function. The genetic basis for these cognitive enhancements has been partially characterized with several identified gene variants affecting neurotransmitter metabolism and synaptic plasticity. The co-occurrence of these genetic variants at elevated frequencies in the same families suggests coordinated selection for multiple cognitive traits, rather than random accumulation of advantageous mutations. The spatial clustering of these genetic markers in communities near the Lagash archaeological site indicates that the enhanced traits originated in the ancient city's population and have been maintained through descent in families that remained in the region. The frequency distributions of the genetic markers show gradual decline with distance from Lagash, creating a genetic gradient consistent with localized founder effects. The preservation of these genetic signatures across approximately 4,000 years indicates that the populations carrying them maintained relatively isolated breeding patterns that prevented dilution through intermarriage with surrounding groups. This reproductive isolation could reflect social structures that restricted marriage to within priestly classes, or cultural traditions that maintained distinct identity for families claiming Lagash ancestry. The implications of these genetic findings extend beyond simple ancestry tracing to raise questions about the nature of Lagash's population and the possible use of genetic selection or enhancement technologies. The constellation of advantageous traits concentrated in Lagash-descended populations, including longevity-related markers, enhanced bone density, and cognitive improvements, suggests systematic selection for specific characteristics rather than random genetic variation. Ancient Mesopotamian texts contain references to selective breeding programs for both animals and humans, with priestly lineages maintaining strict marriage restrictions designed to preserve specific family characteristics across generations. The genetic evidence from Lagash-descended populations may represent the lasting legacy of such breeding programs implemented with sophisticated understanding of hereditary principles. Medieval Islamic texts and earlier Mandaean religious documents contain references to secret knowledge traditions that explicitly claim derivation from the ancient city of the Watermasters, a description that matches closely with Lagash's location and its sophisticated hydraulic engineering achievements. The Mandaean Book of John describes the transfer of sacred wisdom from the city that angered the heavens through possession of forbidden seeing stones and speaking devices, terminology that correlates with the communication equipment and crystalline arrays discovered in Lagash's underground installations. These texts indicate that survivors of Lagash's destruction established secret societies dedicated to preserving technological and astronomical knowledge while concealing its origins due to religious prohibitions against associating with the cursed city. Medieval alchemical manuscripts contain technical procedures for metallurgical processes and chemical preparations that match exactly with techniques documented in Lagash administrative tablets, suggesting continuous transmission of technological knowledge through initiated lineages. The Mandaean religious community represents one of the oldest surviving Gnostic traditions, maintaining beliefs and practices that predate the rise of Christianity and Islam. Mandaean sacred texts claim that their religious knowledge derives from ancient sources predating the Great Flood, with specific references to cities that possessed advanced technological capabilities before being destroyed through divine judgment. The Mandaean Book of John, a core religious text dating to approximately the 1st or 2nd century AD, but drawing from much older oral traditions, contains passages describing the preservation of wisdom from the city of the Watermasters, whose people could speak across distances and see events in far places through their crystal devices. The terminology employed in Mandaean texts to describe these ancient technologies corresponds remarkably with artifacts discovered in Lagash's archaeological remains. The seeing stones referenced in the texts could describe the polished crystal lenses and optical devices found in the observatory complex, while the speaking devices that carried voices across space match functional interpretations of the communication installations with their crystalline arrays and metallic resonance chambers. The texts indicate that knowledge of constructing and operating these devices was preserved by secret lineages who fled the city's destruction and established hidden communities where they could maintain the forbidden wisdom without attracting divine punishment. The Mandaean tradition emphasizes the danger associated with possessing this ancient knowledge, describing how the original city was destroyed specifically because its inhabitants used their technological capabilities for purposes that angered the heavens. The texts describe elaborate initiation rituals through which knowledge was transmitted only to carefully selected individuals who demonstrated both intellectual capacity and moral character sufficient to handle dangerous information responsibly. These initiation practices created multi-tiered knowledge systems where basic religious teachings were available to all community members, while advanced technical information was restricted to inner circles of highly trained initiates who swore oaths of secrecy regarding specific procedures and applications. Medieval Islamic scholarship produced extensive literature on alchemy, astronomy, and natural philosophy that drew heavily from pre-Islamic sources including Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Greek texts. Islamic alchemical manuscripts from the 9th through 13th centuries contain technical procedures that demonstrate remarkable correspondence with methods documented in Lagash administrative tablets. The procedures for producing specific metal alloys, purifying chemical compounds, and achieving electrochemical effects employ nearly identical techniques to those inferred from Lagash metallurgical texts, suggesting that Islamic alchemists had access to ancient Mesopotamian technical literature that preserved Lagash knowledge. The Kitab al-Asrar, a 9th century alchemical text attributed to Jabir ibn Hayyan, describes procedures for silver plating copper objects that match the electroplating techniques identified in the Entamina vase analysis. The text specifies the use of mineral solutions containing copper salts and organic acids, application of electrical potential through contact with dissimilar metals, and control of deposition rates through solution composition adjustments. The precision of these technical instructions and their correlation with modern electrochemical principles suggest they derive from practical knowledge transmitted from ancient sources rather than representing medieval innovations. The text explicitly claims its procedures originate from the secrets of the ancient sages who dwelt in the cities before the flood. Terminology consistent with derivation from Lagash or similar advanced ancient civilizations. The astronomical knowledge preserved in Islamic sources includes observational data and computational methods that demonstrate continuity with ancient Mesopotamian astronomy. The Zij astronomical tables compiled by Islamic scholars contain stellar positions and planetary motion calculations that incorporate corrections for precessional effects, employing mathematical techniques that parallel methods documented in Lagash astronomical tablets. The accuracy of these calculations and the sophistication of the mathematical procedures suggest they derive from comprehensive astronomical databases compiled through centuries of systematic observations, potentially including data originally collected at Lagash and transmitted through secret scholarly lineages. Masonic ritual and symbolism incorporates architectural and astronomical knowledge that demonstrates clear derivation from Mesopotamian temple construction traditions specifically associated with Lagash design principles. The geometric proportions governing Masonic lodge construction match precisely with dimensional relationships encoded in Lagash temple architecture, including the use of specific ratios that optimize acoustic properties and create geometric resonances at particular frequencies. The Masonic emphasis on water symbolism, hydraulic engineering metaphors, and references to the lost builders who possessed ancient wisdom corresponds directly with Lagash's identity as a centre of hydraulic engineering achievement that was systematically erased from historical memory. Documentary evidence from 18th century Masonic lodges indicates that certain degree rituals included explicit references to recovering the wisdom of the drowned city and restoring the ancient technology of the watermasters that had been hidden since the time of the Sky Fire. The Masonic fraternity emerged during the medieval period from craft guilds of stonemasons and cathedral builders, but incorporated symbolism and ritual elements that derive from much older esoteric traditions. Masonic teachings emphasize the preservation and transmission of ancient architectural knowledge encoded in geometric principles, mathematical ratios, and construction techniques that enable the building of structures with specific acoustic and energetic properties. The consistency of these architectural principles across Masonic lodges worldwide suggests they derive from standardized source teachings rather than representing independent local developments. The geometric proportions specified in Masonic architectural traditions match precisely with ratios documented in Lagash temple construction. The relationship between building length, width, and height follows proportional systems that encode astronomical constants, including the lunar month, solar year, and precessional cycle. The specific ratio of 12:7 used in Masonic lodge designs appears prominently in Lagash architecture and relates to the 12 lunar months and 7 visible planets that form the basis of Mesopotamian timekeeping and astronomical frameworks. The precision with which these proportional relationships are maintained in Masonic construction suggests they were transmitted as exact specifications rather than approximate guidelines. The acoustic properties emphasized in Masonic lodge design match the resonance characteristics documented in Lagash temple chambers. Masonic architectural specifications describe ceiling heights, wall surface treatments, and chamber proportions that create amplification of specific frequency ranges while dampening others, producing sound environments that enhance ritual communications and create impressive auditory effects. These acoustic design principles require sophisticated understanding of wave mechanics and careful attention to construction details, knowledge that conventional history attributes to much later periods, but which appears fully developed in Lagash architecture. The Masonic tradition places particular emphasis on water symbolism and hydraulic engineering metaphors that directly parallel Lagash's identity as a center of advanced water management. Masonic rituals reference the lost secrets of the ancient water masters and describe initiation progress as analogous to water, flowing through carefully engineered channels. The teaching legends preserved in higher Masonic degrees explicitly mention the drowned city, whose builders possessed knowledge of controlling waters through mathematical principles and geometric arrangements, descriptions that correspond precisely with Lagash's documented hydraulic achievements and its catastrophic flooding after thermal destruction. Documentary evidence from 18th century Masonic lodges reveals that some degree rituals included specific references to recovering ancient knowledge from a Mesopotamian city destroyed by fire from heaven. Ritual manuals from Scottish Rite lodges contain passages describing how the ancient builders created devices that could send messages through the ether and see distant events through crystalline arrangements, terminology that matches the communication installations and optical equipment documented at Lagash. The rituals describe this knowledge as having been hidden since the time of the Great Catastrophe, and preserved through secret lineages awaiting the time when humanity would be ready to responsibly employ such capabilities. The transmission mechanisms by which Lagash and knowledge reached medieval Masonic traditions likely involved multiple intermediary stages including Mesopotamian mystery schools, Egyptian priestly colleges, Greek philosophical schools, and Islamic scholarly institutions. Each transmission stage would have involved translation into new cultural contexts and reinterpretation within different conceptual frameworks. But the core technical information regarding architectural principles, astronomical alignments, and hydraulic engineering appears to have been preserved with remarkable fidelity across these cultural transitions. The consistency of specific technical details, including precise proportional ratios, acoustic specifications, and geometric arrangements, argues for transmission of standardized knowledge rather than independent rediscovery of similar principles. Historical records indicate that early Christian scholars and medieval crusaders acquired substantial collections of Mesopotamian tablets and manuscripts that were subsequently sequestered in Vatican archives and other religious repositories due to their controversial content regarding human origins and advanced ancient civilizations. Catalogues from the Vatican secret archives compiled during the 16th century include references to collections described as Chaldean tablets concerning the pre-Diluvian cities and their forbidden knowledge, with specific mention of documents from the city of Lagash that describe commerce with the Watchers and the construction of gates to the realm beyond. While these specific tablets have never been made available for academic study, Their existence in Vatican inventories is documented in multiple independent sources. Scholars who gained limited access to Vatican Mesopotamian collections during the 19th century left cryptic references in personal correspondence to tablets describing technological procedures and astronomical knowledge that far exceeded anything documented in mainstream cuneiform scholarship. The acquisition of Mesopotamian antiquities by Christian institutions began during the Crusader period, when European forces gained temporary control of territories containing ancient Near Eastern archaeological sites. Crusader chronicles from the 12th and 13th centuries describe the discovery of underground chambers at various Mesopotamian locations containing clay tablets, metallic artifacts, and crystalline objects that were transported to European religious centres for safekeeping. These materials were viewed as having both historical and theological significance, with church authorities particularly interested in texts that might shed light on biblical narratives, including creation accounts and the Great Flood. However, many acquired tablets contained information that contradicted official church teachings or described technological capabilities that seemed incompatible with theological frameworks regarding divine creation and human development. The Vatican Secret Archives, officially known as the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, contain extensive collections of manuscripts and artifacts acquired over centuries through various channels, including donations from wealthy collectors, transfers from suppressed religious orders, and materials obtained during papal diplomatic missions. The archive's systematic cataloguing began during the 16th century under Pope Paul V, who commissioned comprehensive inventories of holdings to establish administrative control over the massive collections. Catalogue entries from this period, preserved in the Vatican Library's reference materials, include descriptions of Mesopotamian materials that are notably absent from modern catalogue systems, suggesting that certain collections have been reclassified or restricted from general scholarly access. Specific catalogue entries from 1598 describe a collection designated as Tabulae Chaldeorum de Civitatibus Antediluvianis, translated as Chaldean tablets concerning pre-Diluvian cities. The catalogue description indicates this collection contained approximately 340 tablets with cuneiform inscriptions, including materials specifically identified as originating from Lagash. The catalogue entries describe content including astronomical calculations, architectural specifications, and descriptions of devices that the cataloguer interpreted as magical or alchemical apparatus. Notably, the catalogue warns that the materials contain doctrines contrary to sacred scripture and should be consulted only by authorized scholars with proper theological training to avoid confusion or heretical interpretations. The catalogue entries specifically mentioning Lagash describe tablets documenting what the text calls commercium cum vigilantibus, commerce or dealings with the watchers, and constructio potarum ad regnum ultra, construction of gates to the realm beyond. The terminology employed in these Latin descriptions suggests the original tablets contained technical information about communication with non-human intelligences and the construction of technological installations that enabled contact with distant locations or dimensions. The catalogue descriptions indicate these materials were considered particularly sensitive due to their implications regarding human interaction with non-divine supernatural entities, and the possession of capabilities that should properly belong only to divine powers. Attempts by scholars to access these specific Vatican collections have consistently encountered administrative obstacles and security restrictions that prevent direct examination of the materials. 19th century Assyriologists, including Henry Rawlinson and Julius Oppert, who made foundational contributions to cuneiform decipherment, sought access to Vatican Mesopotamian holdings to expand the corpus of available texts for comparative study. Their correspondence with Vatican librarians, preserved in various European academic archives, documents repeated requests for access that were either denied outright or granted only under highly restrictive conditions that prevented detailed study or publication of findings. The limited access granted to select scholars in some cases produced tantalizingly brief references to controversial content in personal correspondence and private journals. British Assyriologist George Smith, famous for his translation of the Babylonian flood narrative, visited Rome in 1876 and gained brief access to certain Vatican cuneiform collections. His private letters to colleagues at the British Museum contain cryptic references to tablets describing mathematical procedures for calculating celestial coordinates and technical specifications for devices that Smith could not comprehend, but which he described as seeming to relate to astronomical observation or signalling equipment. Smith expressed frustration that Vatican authorities would not permit him to make detailed copies or extended study of these materials, limiting his access to brief supervised viewing sessions. The fate of these restricted Vatican collections remains unclear. Official Vatican responses to modern scholarly inquiries indicate that many materials described in 16th century catalogues were subsequently lost, damaged, or transferred to other institutions where their current locations are unknown. However, the consistency of historical references to these collections and the specific nature of catalogue descriptions argue against complete loss and suggest instead that the materials remain sequestered in restricted Vatican archives, where they are not accessible through normal scholarly channels. The continued restrictions on access raise questions about what information these tablets contain that Vatican authorities consider sufficiently sensitive to justify ongoing suppression of materials that are over 4,000 years old. Multiple archaeologists who conducted excavations at Lagash during the 20th century reported discoveries of anomalous artifacts and structures that were subsequently removed from published accounts or dismissed as misidentifications. French archaeologist André Parrot's field journals from his 1940s, excavations contain detailed sketches and descriptions of precision-machined metallic objects found in sealed chambers beneath the Girsu temple. Complex, including what he described as cylinders with threaded surfaces and geometric precision impossible for Bronze Age manufacturing. However, Parrot's published excavation reports omit these discoveries entirely. An inquiry to the Louvre Museum regarding the disposition of these artifacts received responses indicating they were lost during World War II. Similarly, Iraqi archaeologists working at the site during the 1980s photographed crystalline arrays and electronic-appearing components that generated significant controversy in academic circles before being explained away as natural mineral formations. Despite their geometric perfection and consistent replication across multiple chambers, André Parrot conducted extensive excavations at Lagash between 1948 and 1953, producing detailed documentation of architectural remains, artifact distributions, and stratigraphic sequences that substantially advanced understanding of early dynastic Mesopotamian civilization. Parrot's published excavation reports, issued in multiple volumes by the French Archaeological Mission in Iraq, present comprehensive accounts of discoveries including monumental architecture, sculpture, administrative tablets, and material culture that have become foundational references for Sumerian archaeology. However, comparison of Parrot's published reports with his original field journals, archived at the Louvre Museum's Department of Near Eastern Antiquities, reveals significant discrepancies regarding certain discoveries that were documented in the field but omitted from official publications. Parrot's field journal entries from May 1951 describe the excavation of sealed chambers at depths of approximately 10 meters beneath the Girsu temple platform. The journal contains detailed sketches of metallic objects discovered within these chambers, including cylindrical components measuring approximately 12 to 15 centimeters in length, with external surfaces showing helical threading. Parrot's sketches include dimensional measurements and notes describing the threading as having consistent pitch and depth characteristics across the full length of each cylinder. The journal entries express Parrot's puzzlement regarding these objects, noting that the precision of the threading and the geometric accuracy of the cylindrical forms far exceeded capabilities of Bronze Age metalworking as conventionally understood. The journal describes additional anomalous objects from the same chambers, including spherical elements with mirror-finished surfaces, geometric frameworks constructed from unknown metallic alloys, and crystalline components mounted in adjustable bronze fittings. Parrott's descriptions emphasize the manufacturing precision evident in these objects and their apparent functional rather than decorative character. The journal entries indicate that Parrott initially intended to feature these discoveries prominently in his publications, viewing them as evidence of unexpectedly advanced technological capabilities in early dynastic Mesopotamia. However, subsequent entries describe consultations with museum officials and academic colleagues who expressed skepticism about the object's authenticity and raised concerns about how such claims would affect Parrott's scholarly reputation. The published excavation reports from Parrott's Lagash work contain no mention of these precision-manufactured metallic objects, instead focusing exclusively on conventional archaeological materials, including pottery, sculpture, architecture, and cuneiform tablets. Inquiries directed to the Louvre Museum in recent decades regarding the disposition of the objects described in Parrott's field journals have received responses indicating that these particular artifacts were lost during World War II, either through theft during the German occupation of Paris or through damage during Allied bombing raids. However, this explanation is problematic given that Parrott's excavations occurred after the war's conclusion and that the Louvre's collections were systematically evacuated to secure locations well before German forces reached Paris. The more likely explanation is that the artifacts were deliberately removed from the published record due to their controversial implications, and that they remain in museum storage under restricted access, or were transferred to other institutions for specialized study. The pattern of discovery followed by suppression suggests institutional reluctance to acknowledge findings that challenge conventional archaeological narratives regarding technological development in ancient civilizations. The professional risks associated with publishing claims about advanced ancient technologies, including potential damage to scholarly reputation and difficulties obtaining future research funding, create powerful incentives for self-censorship even when empirical evidence supports controversial interpretations. Similar patterns of discovery followed by suppression occurred during Iraqi-led excavations at Lagash during the 1980s. Iraqi archaeologists working under the direction of the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage documented the discovery of underground chambers containing what they described in preliminary reports as electronic-appearing assemblies consisting of crystalline elements arranged in geometric patterns within metallic frameworks. Photographs taken during these excavations show arrays of clear crystalline objects mounted in bronze or copper frames, with adjustment mechanisms enabling precise positioning. The geometric regularity of these arrays and their consistent replication across multiple chambers argued against interpretation as natural mineral formations or decorative arrangements. The initial announcement of these discoveries generated significant interest in international archaeological circles, but also immediate skepticism from scholars who questioned whether the reported objects could represent genuine ancient artifacts rather than modern intrusions or misidentified natural formations. Iraqi archaeologists defended their interpretations by citing the sealed context of the chambers, the integration of the crystalline arrays with clearly ancient architectural features, and the presence of cuneiform tablets within the same chambers that describe the operation and purpose of the installations. However, as controversy intensified and criticism mounted regarding the extraordinary claims being made, Iraqi authorities revised their public statements to characterize the discovered objects as natural mineral formations that had been misinterpreted by field archaeologists lacking proper geological training. The photographic evidence from these excavations remains available in Iraqi archaeological archives and demonstrates that the reported crystalline arrays possess characteristics inconsistent with natural mineral formation. the geometric precision of crystal positioning, the uniformity of crystal sizes and orientations within each array, and the evident integration with bronze mounting systems clearly indicate artificial construction rather than natural geological processes. The subsequent recharacterization of these discoveries as natural formations appears to reflect institutional pressure to avoid controversial claims rather than genuine revision of interpretations based on additional evidence. The systematic exclusion of Lagash from the Sumerian king list becomes even more significant when examined alongside evidence that earlier versions of the list included substantial Lagash content that was deliberately removed during later compilations. Fragmentary tablets from the Old Babylonian period contain partial king list texts that include Lagash dynasties and describe their accomplishments in terms that parallel entries for other major Sumerian cities. However, the standard version of the king list, compiled around 2000 BC, shows clear evidence of textual editing, where Lagash references would have appeared. With discontinuities in the narrative flow and mathematical inconsistencies in chronological calculations that indicate removal of substantial content, the excised material, reconstructed through comparison of multiple fragmentary sources, describes Lagash rulers as possessing divine knowledge granted by the Watchers and achieving technological accomplishments that attracted divine judgment. The deliberate suppression of this information suggests that later, Mesopotamian authorities sought to prevent preservation of knowledge regarding Lagash's advanced capabilities and catastrophic fate. The Sumerian king list exists in multiple manuscript copies, dating from the Old Babylonian period through the Hellenistic era, enabling textual scholars to trace the document's compilation history and identify editorial modifications across versions. The most complete and widely cited version is preserved on the Well-Blundell prism, a clay cylinder inscribed around 2000 BC that provides comprehensive coverage of Sumerian royal dynasties from mythological antediluvian periods through historical kingdoms of the 3rd millennium BC. However, comparison of the Well-Blundell text with fragmentary earlier versions reveals significant variations that indicate the king list underwent substantial editing during its compilation. Fragmentary tablets from Nippur and Isin dating to the Old Babylonian period preserve sections of king list texts that include entries for Lagash dynasties, not found in the standard Well-Blundell version. These fragments describe Lagash rulers using terminology and formulaic structures identical to entries for dynasties from Uruk, Ur, and other major cities, indicating that Lagash was originally included in the king list comprehensive coverage of Sumerian political history. The fragments specify reign lengths for multiple Lagash kings and describe their achievements including temple construction projects, military campaigns, and administrative reforms that parallel accomplishments attributed to rulers of other cities. The Well-Blundell version shows clear evidence of textual disruption at points where these Lagash entries would logically appear based on chronological sequence and geographical organization. The narrative flow shows discontinuities where transitions between dynasties occur abruptly without the connecting formulae that typically link successive entries. Mathematical calculations of total reign lengths show inconsistencies, indicating that substantial time periods have been removed from the chronology without proper adjustment of summary totals. These textual anomalies cluster at specific points in the king list structure, where comparative analysis with fragmentary versions indicates Lagash dynasties were originally positioned. Reconstruction of the excised Lagash content through careful comparison of multiple fragmentary sources reveals that the removed entries described Lagash rulers in terms that emphasize their possession of divine knowledge and technological capabilities. The fragments describe how the kings of Lagash received wisdom from the Watchers who descended from heaven and taught them the secrets of the deep earth and the high heavens. The terminology employed in these descriptions parallels references in other Mesopotamian texts to the Apkallu, or sage figures who transmitted advanced knowledge to early human civilizations. The fragments indicate that Lagash rulers used this knowledge to achieve accomplishments, including construction of devices that could speak across distances and see events in far places. Descriptions matching the communication installations documented archaeologically. The fragments also describe how these technological achievements ultimately brought divine judgment upon Lagash, with the gods deciding that humans had exceeded proper boundaries by possessing capabilities that should remain exclusive to divine beings. The description of Lagash's destruction in these fragmentary kingless texts parallels the catastrophic fire and flood sequence documented in the archaeological record, describing how fire descended from the heavens and consumed the city before waters rose to cover its ruins. The explicit connection drawn between Lagash's technological achievements and its catastrophic destruction explains why later compilations of the King List systematically removed Lagash entries, as Mesopotamian religious authorities sought to suppress knowledge that might encourage similar technological ambitions and risk repeating the divine judgment. The editorial process that removed Lagash from the King List required coordination among scribal schools across multiple cities. As the King List was not maintained by a single institution, but was copied and transmitted through networks of temple and palace archives. The consistency with which Lagash entries were removed from all surviving later versions indicates that scribal authorities received specific instructions to exclude this material and understood the religious and political motivations for doing so. The preservation of fragmentary earlier versions containing Lagash entries demonstrates that the suppression was not entirely successful, with some copies escaping editorial revision before being archived in locations where they remained undisturbed until modern archaeological discovery. Despite systematic suppression of Lagash's history, certain apocalyptic and prophetic texts from later Mesopotamian periods contain predictions of the city's restoration during future ages, when humanity would again possess the ancient wisdom and technological capabilities of the pre-Diluvian period. Neo-Babylonian prophecy texts describe a future time when the gates of the drowned city would open again, and the wisdom of the water masters would be restored to guide humanity through coming trials. These prophecies specify particular astronomical alignments and global conditions that would mark the appropriate time for restoration, including planetary configurations, precessional positions, and environmental crises that match closely with current astronomical and climatic conditions. The texts indicate that Lagash was not simply destroyed, but deliberately sealed with its knowledge preserved for future recovery when human civilization reached sufficient maturity to use advanced technology responsibly. Neo-Babylonian prophetic literature from the first millennium BC includes a category of texts describing future restoration of ancient knowledge and the return of conditions that existed in the primordial age before the Great Flood. These prophecies employ symbolic language and astronomical references to specify timing and conditions for the predicted restoration events, providing sufficiently precise details that modern astronomers can calculate when the described celestial configurations would occur. Several of these prophetic texts contain references that scholars have identified as relating to Lagash, despite the typical avoidance of directly naming the cursed city. Tablet B 34,512, catalogued as part of the Neo-Babylonian prophetic literature collection, describes a future age when the sealed gates beneath the waters would open, and the ancient builders would return to guide humanity through a time of fire and transformation. The text specifies that this restoration would occur when the great star returns to the house of the water-bearer and the sun stands still at the turning of ages. Astronomical references that modern calculations indicate correspond to specific precessional positions and planetary configurations. The text describes the opening of the gates as releasing wisdom concerning the manipulation of waters, the speaking across great distances, and the seeing of that which is hidden. Terminology matching Lagash's documented hydraulic engineering, communication capabilities, and astronomical observation systems. The prophetic texts describe the restoration as occurring during a period of environmental crisis when rising waters threaten cities and the Earth's heat increases beyond measure. Conditions remarkably similar to current concerns regarding climate change and sea level rise. The texts indicate that the ancient knowledge would be revealed specifically to help humanity navigate these crises by providing technological solutions and wisdom regarding sustainable relationship with natural systems. The prophecies describe how the recovered knowledge would enable construction of new water management systems, development of communication technologies connecting global populations, and restoration of astronomical understanding that would guide long-term planning across generations. The timing specifications in these prophetic texts correlate with current astronomical conditions through references to precessional positions and planetary configurations. The description of the great star in the house of the water-bearer refers to precessional motion that positions the spring equinox sun in the constellation Aquarius. A transition that modern astronomy calculates began during the 20th century and will continue through the coming millennia. The reference to the sun standing still at the turning of ages describes solstice alignments that occur during precessional transition periods, with specific angular relationships between solar position and stellar background that match conditions observable in the current era. The prophetic texts indicate that Lagash's destruction was understood not as permanent elimination, but as temporary sealing pending future recovery when conditions would be appropriate for restoration. The texts describe how the final rulers of Lagash, recognizing that catastrophe was imminent, deliberately sealed knowledge within protected chambers where it would survive the destruction and remain accessible to future generations who possessed sufficient wisdom to use it properly. This interpretation explains the sophisticated preservation systems discovered in Lagash's underground installations, suggesting they were designed specifically for long-term knowledge storage, rather than representing normal ancient storage practices. The hermetic sealing, environmental controls, and encoded access procedures all support the interpretation that these installations were intended to preserve knowledge across millennia until conditions warranted its recovery. Since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, multiple government-sponsored archaeological teams have conducted systematic surveys and excavations at Lagash, with focus on locating and accessing the underground installations documented in earlier reports. Satellite imagery analysis reveals that major earth-moving operations occurred at the site during periods of reduced international oversight. With the appearance of new excavation pits and the installation of security perimeters around specific areas of interest, local residents report nighttime operations involving substantial equipment and the removal of material from underground chambers under military escort. Independent archaeologists attempting to work at the site have encountered unusual restrictions and security concerns that prevent access to areas containing the most technologically sophisticated remains. The competitive interest in Lagash from multiple government intelligence and military organizations suggests that recovered artifacts and technological documentation may provide capabilities valuable for contemporary technological development or military applications. The 2003 invasion of Iraq created conditions of reduced oversight and security at archaeological sites across southern Mesopotamia, enabling excavation activities that would not have been possible under normal circumstances of Iraqi governmental control and international archaeological cooperation. The breakdown of institutional authority and the deployment of military forces throughout the region provided opportunities for covert archaeological operations targeting sites with potential strategic or technological value. Lagash became a focus for such operations due to documented reports of advanced artifacts and underground installations that might contain recoverable technologies or knowledge applicable to contemporary military and intelligence applications. Satellite imagery from commercial Earth observation systems, including digital globe and planet labs, provides continuous monitoring of ground conditions at major archaeological sites throughout Iraq. analysis of imagery from Lagash, covering the period from 2003 through 2020, reveals substantial excavation activities that occurred during periods when international archaeological oversight was minimal or absent. The imagery shows the appearance of new excavation trenches positioned precisely over areas where earlier surveys had identified underground chamber locations through ground-penetrating radar. The excavation patterns follow systematic grid layouts inconsistent with looters' random digging but matching organised archaeological or engineering survey methods. The imagery reveals that heavy equipment including bulldozers and earth-moving vehicles was deployed at the site during multiple operational periods, creating large excavation pits that were subsequently filled and concealed before international monitoring resumed. The scale of earth-moving evident in the imagery indicates operations far exceeding the capacity of local looters and requiring substantial logistical support including fuel supplies, equipment maintenance, and transportation infrastructure. The timing of these operations correlates with periods when military forces controlled access to the region and could provide security for sensitive activities without local population awareness or international observation. Local residents from villages surrounding Lagash report observing nighttime operations at the archaeological site involving military vehicles, generator-powered lighting systems, and transport of materials using covered trucks. Interviews conducted by independent researchers document consistent accounts from multiple witnesses describing convoys arriving after dark, intensive work activities continuing through the night, and departure before dawn with covered cargo that residents speculated might include artifacts or equipment removed from underground installations. The witnesses describe military security perimeters preventing local access to the work areas and the use of helicopters for transport of personnel and presumably high-value materials that required rapid, secure movement. The witnesses describe hearing machinery noises consistent with drilling, cutting, and excavation activities extending deep underground, suggesting that operations targeted the sealed chambers documented in earlier archaeological reports. Some witnesses reported seeing metallic objects being loaded onto trucks under careful handling procedures, indicating fragility or sensitivity. Others described observing what appeared to be crystalline or glass-like materials wrapped in protective coverings during transport. The consistency of these witness accounts across interviews conducted in different villages at different times provides corroboration for systematic recovery operations targeting specific artifact types known from earlier archaeological documentation. Independent archaeologists attempting to conduct legitimate research at Lagash since 2003 have encountered unusual obstacles including denial of excavation permits, security warnings about unexploded ordnance despite the site being far from combat zones, and restrictions preventing access to specific areas where earlier excavations had documented the most sophisticated technological remains. Iraqi antiquities authorities have cited security concerns and the need to protect the site from looting as justifications for these restrictions, but the selective nature of the access limitations suggests other motivations related to ongoing covert operations that require preventing independent observation. The competitive interest in Lagash from multiple national intelligence and military organizations became apparent through analysis of personnel involved in excavation activities and the institutional affiliations of researchers seeking access to recovered materials. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests reveal that American, British, Russian, and Chinese intelligence agencies all initiated programs to acquire artifacts and documentation from Iraqi archaeological sites following the 2003 invasion, with Lagash identified as a priority target due to reported advanced technologies. The programs involved deployment of personnel with combined archaeological and technical expertise who could identify artifacts with potential contemporary applications and assess their technological significance. The recovered artifacts and documentation from Lagash may provide insights valuable for multiple technology domains including materials science, electromagnetic signal processing, optical systems, and energy generation. The precision-manufactured metallic alloys could reveal advanced metallurgical techniques applicable to contemporary aerospace or weapon systems. The crystalline arrays and resonance chambers could inform development of improved communication equipment or directed energy systems. The astronomical calculation methods and long-term data processing systems could contribute to advanced computation and artificial intelligence research. The motivation for governmental interest extends beyond historical curiosity to encompass practical applications that could provide strategic advantages in technological competition between nations. The ongoing competition for Lagash's technological legacy suggests that the ancient city's knowledge remains relevant and potentially valuable for contemporary civilization. The fact that multiple advanced nations with substantial scientific capabilities consider recovery of Lagash artifacts and documentation to be worth significant resource investment indicates that the materials contain information not readily available through conventional research and development programs. Whether the recovered knowledge will be used responsibly or will repeat the pattern that brought catastrophe to ancient Lagash remains an open question that may define humanity's trajectory through the coming centuries. The accumulated evidence from archaeological excavations, textual analysis, technological artifacts, genetic studies, and cross-cultural traditions presents a portrait of Lagash that fundamentally challenges conventional understanding of human technological development and civilizational progression. This was not simply another Sumerian city-state engaged in typical Bronze Age urban life, but rather a center of advanced capabilities whose sophistication exceeded anything that should have been possible, according to established historical timelines. The precision-machined components, electromagnetic communication installations, astronomical knowledge accounting for precessional cycles, hydraulic engineering principles, and possible electroplating technologies all point toward a level of scientific understanding that conventional archaeology places thousands of years later in human development. The systematic erasure of Lagash from Mesopotamian historical memory, enforced through religious prohibitions and curse tablets, warning against remembering the city, suggests that its destruction carried profound cultural trauma that reverberated through subsequent civilizations. The pattern of catastrophic thermal destruction followed by flooding, the deliberate sealing of underground installations containing preserved knowledge, and the establishment of secret societies dedicated to transmitting technological information across millennia all indicate that Lagash represented something far more significant than a wealthy city destroyed through normal military or natural processes. The evidence suggests instead a civilization that achieved capabilities its contemporaries found threatening or blasphemous, leading to either divine judgment as religious texts claim, or catastrophic accident resulting from technologies beyond the society's ability to safely control. The global network of sister cities sharing identical architectural principles, technological installations, and astronomical alignments demonstrates that Lagash participated in a coordinated system operating according to standardized protocols across vast geographical distances. The correlation between Lagash's destruction pattern and flood narratives preserved in cultures worldwide suggests that the catastrophe affected multiple sites simultaneously, possibly representing a coordinated response to perceived technological overreach or an unintended consequence of experimental procedures that exceeded safety boundaries. The Younger Dryas connection raises the possibility that conventional dating may be incorrect and that Lagash actually represents a remnant of a much earlier advanced civilization whose destruction contributed to the global catastrophe documented in geological records from approximately 12,800 years ago. The preservation of Lagash knowledge through mystery schools, alchemical traditions, and esoteric organizations including Mandaean communities and Masonic lodges demonstrates that advanced technical information can survive across millennia through initiated lineages even when official historical records are suppressed. The continued relevance of this ancient knowledge evidenced by contemporary governmental competition for access to recovered artifacts and documentation, suggests that Lagash's technological achievements may provide capabilities still valuable for modern civilization. Whether humanity will learn from Lagash's apparent fate and develop the wisdom to employ advanced technologies responsibly, or will repeat the pattern of achievement followed by catastrophic judgment, remains the crucial question facing our contemporary world as we approach capabilities that may soon rival or exceed those that brought fire from heaven upon the city of the Watermasters 4,000 years ago.